Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar series. I hope everyone can hear me. Can everyone hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, cool. So today we have some interesting topics and speakers. I want to start off by asking that you consider donating towards the organization that we are supporting, which is Wild Heart Rehab Center. You can also do this by following the link or scan the QR code that we have that we will show on the slide, this slide. And you can also support them by purchasing some of the merchandise, which you will see on that slideshow. And then just one house rule is that you please type any questions that you will have during any of the sessions in the Q&A box. You will see there's a Q&A box in the top and not in the chat box. And then I want to welcome our first speaker, who is Karen Tradler, who will be talking about milk formulation, common nursing challenges and conditions in rhino calves. So Karen is part of conservation management and crisis response management, trained and qualified. She has 30 years experience in wildlife rescue, response and rehabilitation in the field, working on multiple projects locally and internationally. She set up and managed Wildcare Africa. She's also part of Rehab Center, EWT, Rhino Response Setup, and coordinated +3 Rhino Orphanage. She qualified and worked at National Welfare Inspector and Wildlife Expert and is a board member of the EWT and has lots of involvement in captive lion issues, rhino and elephants. So yeah, welcome Corinne, the floor is yours.
Morning, everyone. We got all set up and now my PowerPoint is just hanging. It won't do anything. So is it at all possible to load it from your side? It's just showing a circle and hanging.
Yeah, that would be your internet, Karen. I'll quickly load it and then you can just tell me to proceed with the slides.
Okay, thank you.
Can you see the slides, Karen?
Yes, I can. Okay.
Okay, so then you can proceed.
To put off the video so we have better. Right. Morning, everybody. Going to take you through, and I say a very basic introduction to rearing orphaned rhino, because I'm not going to go into any of the fancy veterinary stuff, because it's the absolute basics that really support the good veterinary care and that give you maximum survival and that enable the calves to go back to the wild. Next one. Next one. Okay, so every single rhino calf counts. Back one. Sorry, can we go back one? Hello.
Karen, I did put it back one.
Okay.
I think I'm going to ask you to put your video off, that we just save on bandwidth. I think there's quite a delay.
My video is off.
Is it off? Okay, great.
Okay, sorry everybody, let's keep going. As I was saying, every single rhino calf counts. The rhino population globally is under threat from poaching and habitat loss. Rhino cows are particularly vulnerable to poaching, as they are the ones that maintain the home range. If they're heavily pregnant and they have very young calves at foot, they'll stay close to water. Because of the calves or being heavily pregnant, there is reduced mobility. And then sadly, we're also seeing an increased demand for young horn. For every single cow that is poached, you lose at least 1 to 2 calves. The female may be pregnant or she has a calf at foot, and then that includes the future calves. And obviously the poaching, both of the calves and the cows, affects the future of rhino populations in general. The rhino populations are under a huge amount of distress and pressure. We're seeing more on male on female aggression. There's a decreased accumulation rate. We're seeing changes in the social dynamics of rhinos. And then we're also seeing very strong manifestations of PTSD. Next one. And then again, every calf counts and can be successfully reared and rehabilitated. Rhino are incredibly tough. They're the stoics of the animal world. They're uncomplicated. They really are easy to rear and put back in the wild. Your challenge is that it's a big undertaking. It's a very big baby. It's a very long process. It requires a lot of resources and strong facilities. And what you're wanting to do is to try and maximize survivability and releasability. But the good news is that with the right protocols and the right basics, it's absolutely worth the investment and the effort and can be done. And every calf that you work on contributes to the data and ongoing research. And obviously that's supported by good record keeping. So what we really want to do when we're rearing calves is to put healthy, viable, self-sustaining rhino that can successfully breed and rear young back into the wild. Next one. The best place for the rhino rearing to take place is at a good rhino orphanage. They have the facilities, the experience, expertise, all the necessary support infrastructure, but it can be done on a game farm as well. And then absolutely critical is good veterinary input. The best rehab, the most successful rehabilitation releases and highest survivability is when you have a really, really close working association between the vet and the rehabber, and where the vet has insight into, and in the best situation, involvement in the facility management. Next one. And then before we go into actually working with the calves, it's just a reminder about the legalities. Rhino are TOPS listed, that's threatened and protected species under NEMBA, the National Environmental Act. Rhino poaching is considered and listed as a priority crime. Vets are not exempt from any of the legislation and the regulations, and there are very strict regulations in terms of TOPS around how you handle horn, transporting animals, and all of that, those legalities have to be adhered to. And then keeping in mind that when you go in to rescue a calf, and even after the calf is at your facility, you're working on a crime scene, and the calf is actually part of the evidence and maybe part of ongoing investigations. And then also just to be aware of the sensitivities around and the security issues. If you're working with certain reserves and working with certain rhino owners, not all of them want their information out there. They don't want it put on Facebook. So just be aware and be sensitive to the security issues around that. And then the question we always get with asking about calves is, what about black versus white? Are they the same? And we all know that they're different species, but the difference from a rearing and a veterinary point of view, your black rhino are very selective browsers. They're much smaller and they're much more challenging from a rearing and a rehabilitation perspective. They do tame a lot easier and settle into captivity, but there are more challenges with rearing the black rhino, more sensitive to diets, more likely to get the problems associated with rearing. Whereas your white rhino are the sort of big, solid generalists, much larger, much more tolerant and less sensitive and finicky, but they are prone to maladjustment syndrome. They don't settle into captivity quite as fast as the white rhino do, as the black rhino do. Next one. And your poaching orphans, it's really critical to keep in mind that one of the most stressful, horrific things that can happen to a rhino calf is to be part of your mum being poached and you being attacked as well. So from a veterinary perspective, don't underestimate the stress and the trauma that these calves go through and the impact that it has on them. we are definitely seeing manifestations of PTSD, hyperreactivities, triggers. We had one calf who would absolutely freak and run into walls if he smelled cigarettes because he associated it with the incident. They have flashbacks, panic, aggression, insecure. And there's some amazing peer-reviewed research on PTSD in elephant calves that have gone through poaching. And one of my colleagues and I are in the process of writing up PTSD in rhino calves. And the stress and the trauma can lead to a whole variety of things, including temporary loss of sight, which is stress-related and may not necessarily have any veterinary basis. They become immune compromised. So what we're just trying to say is don't underestimate the impact that the stress and the trauma have on these calves and what they go through. And you can counteract that in the facility and in your nursing with really consistent handling, trying to identify and then avoid the triggers, having a very calm environment with a limited number of handlers, good supportive care, night lights, having the infrared lights through the night make a difference. Very often if the calves have been exposed to poaching during the night, they become very scared of the dark. So the night lights help. And then definitely socialization with other rhino helps as well. Next one. And then just keep in mind as well that your poaching orphans are severely compromised. There is always a time lag between the poaching and the mother being killed and actually finding the calf. So the calf is dehydrated, hasn't been eating, may have severe injuries, has the impact of stress, maybe overheating, chilling, and is invariably on the edge or in shock or heading for shock by the time that the rescue takes place. So your handling, your treatment protocols, the drugs you select, everything that you do needs to be focused around the fact that not only is it a young animal, but that it is a severely compromised animal and may just be on the edge. And really going back to basics again, stabilize. So often people see the injuries and they panic and they want to get into treating the gunshot wounds. The best thing you can do is to stabilize that calf's condition first, prior or during translocation, and then once it gets to the center. It gives you a much better opportunity to evaluate properly, and then the calf is actually in a better position to cope with anything that you need to do after that. Basic stabilization, temperature, get the temperature up, check that the blood sugar levels are good. Rhino calves especially are prone to hyperglycemia, and then the hydration as well. Next one. So this is not fancy stuff. It's not rocket science. It's really the basics, but it supports good veterinary care and increases your survivability. Just for interest, the hydration status and the condition of rhinos are, especially calves, relatively easy to look at. If you monitor the turgor on the neck hump, a calf in good condition, hydrated, that hump is firm. In a dehydrated or under-conditioned calf, it's wobbly. Skin on the back of the ear. The eyes, they have these lovely little froggy pop-out eyes, and those sync with dehydration. In the calves, the foot pad is still soft enough that you can pick up dehydration and condition from that. Mucous membranes are slightly more challenging because you can't always get into the mouth or to the eye. Next one. Okay, thanks. More basics. No matter how fancy your veterinary treatment is, the better your nursing is and the better your mothering of that calf, the better the survivability and the better success of the veterinary techniques. Warmth is absolutely critical. Comfort. Remember that your calves don't have that subcutaneous fat and their skin is relatively thin still. So having them on soft surfaces makes a huge difference. There are times I've seen Facebook posts where you have tiny little rhino calves that have just been rescued and they have photographs of them on these ice cold concrete floors with no heat and no warmth. And then a few days later saying, oh dear, the calf died. You would be absolutely amazed how warmth, comfort make a huge difference. Company, human or other rhino, the younger the calf, the less responsive they are to other rhino, the more they're looking for just a solid mother figure. planned handling and treatment, and sleep. So often at these facilities, you have a lot of volunteers, you have a lot of people around, and the calves are constantly being disturbed and woken up. And sleep actually contributes quite substantially to the healing and weight gain. And then in the longer term, you also want to make sure that there's lots of exercise for the calf, sunlight, stimulation. The link between exercise and the calf maintaining its temperature and proper GIT functioning is a direct correlation. And then mud, you can't have a rhino orphanage without mud, keeps the skin in condition, helps with wounds and controls parasites and temperature. Really good basic stuff. Next one. Some more basics. Just keep in mind that your rhino are hindgut fermenters. The equid models are very good, but there's increasingly good data available on rhino calves. They have a very, very close one-on-one bond with the mother for up to 2 to 4 years. So that appropriate surrogate mothering is absolutely vital. You want to try and limit your handlers, provide them with security, consistent of handling and monitoring. And that gives you a much higher survival rate and successful rehabilitation and much, much fewer problem behaviors as well, and supports any good veterinary treatment and handling that is being done. The calves will suckle for up to 2 years, and then you're looking at release back to the wild about 3 to 4 years of age. Wherever possible, follow nature, the natural development and stages and ages of the calf. It's your best possible guide for weaning, for feeding, for socializing, and for release. Next one. Handling and handlers. This is absolutely critical. You want to have as few as possible. Ideally, you only want one because the mother has a one-on-one bond, but it tends to wear your carers out a bit. But you really want to limit your handlers and handling and have as little contact with a large number of people as possible, especially if you're planning on putting that calf back into the wild. The consistency and the constant monitoring also improve the nursing and the veterinary care in that you're able to pick up differences and changes in the calf. And then the handling, you want to avoid rough play. It's great fun when they're tiny and your shins are in line with the horn. As they get bigger, it becomes potentially more dangerous. So very basic things like no pushing on the horn, no strength testing, push on the side of the neck rather than on the front of the face. And why I'm focusing quite a bit on the handling and the handlers, and I've said repeatedly limited handlers and limited carers, is that you don't want those rhino becoming too used to everybody. They do recognize different people, and initially they will recognize a few people. Then you introduce more people and they're stressed. And then eventually they just think, oh, all humans are good. So you actually increase their vulnerability to poaching by making them think that all humans are good. And then also the risks of reduced humanization in rhino makes for better release. They're not going to go and chase vehicles and chase your game guards. And then a lot of the zoo techniques, the zoo in inverted commas, things like acclimatizing them to being handled, taking blood, clicker training. That's great if your rhino are going to be permanently captive or semi-captive in a sanctuary situation where you're going to be handling them regularly. But if that animal is planned to go back into the wild, you don't want them to have those triggers where they can be easily handled. And then good advice with rhino as well is to have a good cop, bad cop. So your surrogate mothers or your immediate carers are the good ones that provide the food and the milk and the comfort. And then if you've got somebody who does the injections and the nasty stuff, it's better to try and separate those two. And then keeping in mind as well that your rhino calves are the absolute stoics of the animal world. They don't show pain and distress easily. They hide their symptoms. So by the time you're seeing symptoms in a rhino calf, it's actually quite late and quite far gone. A lot of your wildlife are the same. They hide their symptoms. It's a survival mechanism. But rhino really are stoic. So from a veterinary and a nursing perspective, what you want to do is anticipate problems, prevention, and then put in place for recognizing early symptoms. So again, good monitoring, consistent handling, and then also look at the circumstance and what that could be leading to. Next one. And then just a good sort of thing to follow is your rehabilitation funnel. I had a really good slide of this with graphics and couldn't find it yesterday. So you have the hand-drawn one. When an animal first comes in, it's highly stressed, very weak, very compromised. So you want to try and keep it in a very small confined area, very artificial, where you can control temperature, where you can get to the animal to treat it. And then as the animal recovers, you ease up a little bit and it has more space, less artificial, and increasingly more natural until eventually the calf is released. Next one. And then another thing is that every single calf is an individual. When you're doing rhino calves, especially rhino poaching calves, it's important to remember they're individuals. They develop, they respond, they recover at very, very different rates. They've come from very different circumstances and they have different personalities as well. So you want to adapt and modify your protocols accordingly. Next one. So what are some of the common injuries that you're seeing with rhino calves from poaching? Axe and panga wounds, very, very common. This is a little female that actually came from Kruger Park, and she was hacked both with a panga and an axe. And we actually got an expert in who was able to determine that she'd been hit from the one side with a small axe, those are the shorter wounds, deeper ones, and with a panga from the other side. And that was added, that evidence was put into the investigation and was able to confirm that there had actually been two poachers on site and what weapons they had with them. Gunshot and bullet wounds, very common. Drug overdose. We're not seeing it as much these days where they're using drugs for poaching, but be aware that it can be one of the things that you're faced with. A lot of tendon, hind leg tendon injuries and neck wounds where they try and hack the tendons or the neck. Jackal and hyena bites, predator bites on the very young calves. And then injuries from other rhino. Some of the calves will try, when their mom is dead, to go and join up with other rhino. And not all rhino are friendly, so you sometimes get injuries where they've been tossed or attacked by the rhino. A lesser extent in the calves is the horrific facial mutilization that you're seeing in the bigger ones. And in South Africa, we are seeing much less poisoning than they are in some of the neighboring countries. Next one. Parasites, and you're probably wondering why I'm putting parasites so early in this. We've learned through very hard experience that the worst thing you can do is deworm a rhino routinely or on arrival, and that you don't do massive de-ticking as soon as the calf arrives. The calves that are stressed, the external parasites climb, put my teeth back in, increasingly rapidly with stress, and they attack the perianal area and the axilla of the legs, all the sort of soft parts of the rhino. And what you want to try and do is a gradual de-ticking process. It's so tempting when you see these horrific loads to just get in and de-tick, but it does set the calf back. So you want to do a gradual process. We found that if you mix that lovely pink F10 wound spray with insecticide, with some aqueous cream and warm water and spray it all over, the pink shows you where it's gone. And then you gradually, as the calf gets stronger and over the next few days, get the ticks off and treat the wounds. The ticks and the tick bite wounds around the perianal area can be extremely painful and can cause quite a bit of damage. And you quite often find that the calves will be unwilling to urinate or to defecate because of the discomfort and the pain. So very simple things like using anathane, bicarb spray, keeping the area moist and soft to support the defecation and the urination. And then the scar tissue formation and the risks of infection with this type of parasite infestation is very high. So good wound management. You don't want scar tissue to form, and you want to try and prevent infection. And then just an interesting thing in terms of calves longer term, you want to try and encourage some parasite resistance. So in the rehab process, don't keep the calves completely tick-free. You want them to build up that resistance. Next one. And then another rescue hint, carcass fluids. The very young calves will very often stay at the mother's carcass even after it starts rotting, and will try and suckle. So, and have contact with those carcass fluids. These are highly pathogenic microorganisms, as you know. So a calf that has been at the mother's carcass needs to be managed very, very carefully, especially if it's ingested some of those fluids from trying to suckle, or if it has open wounds. And the calf in the bottom picture is covered with the mother's blood and with carcass fluids and smelt really, really bad. And then dart wounds as well. Just make sure that your dart wounds are treated and checked. Next one. And then what we find with a lot of the rhino is post-rescue crash. And this normally takes place 4 to 10 days after a rescue. Just when you think, oh, the calf is getting strong and he's doing well, it crashes. And this is due to the accumulated effects of the trauma, the stress, the changes in diet, captivity, infection starts setting in. So that 4 to 10 day period requires really good monitoring, and be prepared for that crash. And then with the really bad calves that have been severely compromised, you get further challenges as well when they go through teething or weaning, anything that adds a little bit of extra stress. Those calves very often are impacted by those changes. And we also see an interesting thing with the rhino calves and with a lot of other wild orphans is that they start recovering, the weight comes up, they look like they're beginning to get healthy, and then the body decides, okay, now I need to get rid of any thorns or small wounds, and they may suddenly develop microabscesses. So just be aware that there are longer term problems. Next one. The age and the stage of the calf. The age of the calf will affect how it behaves after the poaching incident, your chances of finding it, and the types of injuries it's going to have. The younger the calf, the more critical that time factor is, and the more compromised it's likely to be. But the younger the calf, the less stressed it is, and the more easily it adapts to captivity and handling. The older calves are much harder in terms of the stress and adapting to captivity. And then the age and the stage of the calf will also determine whether you actually have to bring that calf and bring it in, and what kind of rehab process it needs to go through. Next one. Your 12 to 24-month-old calves are quite a challenge. They have a very, very close bond to the mother. They know enough to know that they don't want to be with humans and in captivity. They are capable of surviving on their own, but that will depend on what the predator density is, what the population composition is, whether there are territorial bulls around. These calves are incredibly stressed and will very often just keep running. They don't bother to stop to eat or drink. They will try and join up with other calves. This is the age group that will break fences. So they're a challenge, and the best is if you have to catch them, if they can't stay on the farm and be monitored and given supplementary feeds, is to relocate to a facility where you have other rhino of the same age who are relatively boma tame. And then that company helps to calm them down. And this age group can be done hands-off. Next one. The neonatal characteristics and considerations, very often very young calves. I'm not going to go through each of those because of the time factor, but just be aware that your newborn calves have very different requirements to the older calves or the older adults in terms of drugs, handling, and nursing and veterinary management. Next one. And then the belly button or the umbilicus, as you know, it's a direct connection from the mother's blood supply to the baby. So it's very important to check the umbilicus, make sure it's not infected. The picture at the bottom is a nice healthy one. The one at the top is one that requires attention. Colostrum in the newborn calves. As I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, very often your heavily pregnant females or the females with newborn calves are the ones that are susceptible to poaching. So a lot of the rescue calves are very young, maybe newborn. So colostrum is a consideration. Serum can be used. We find that the bovine colostrum is better tolerated, and we've had developments of problems with allergies and allergic reactions and intolerance with equine. We find the bovine is much better. If they haven't had colostrum, obviously you need to manage the immunity as it will be compromised. And then again, as you know, the colostrum is very rich in proteins and immunoglobulins and growth factors. It also acts as a laxative for the meconium. So even if you are past that critical period where the gut is closed down, it's still worth giving the colostrum because it has significant benefits for the calf. Next one. Very often you get in post-mature calves. Again, if the females have been through stress, they may hold back on giving birth. This sometimes happens after relocations or dehornings. And your post-mature calves can be as challenging as your preemies. And those are some of the problems that come along with post-mature calves, but with good nursing and good rehab and veterinary, many of them can make it. Next one. Your preemies, because rhino have a relatively long gestation period, they can be premature by a week to 10 days. And with the right veterinary care and the right supportive nursing, they can actually survive. Obviously, the respiration and lung development is a challenge, and we have successfully used surfactants. Apnea is a problem, and using some of those baby monitors that you strap around the abdomen that trigger a shock and get the baby going. Temperature control is absolutely critical. They're incapable of thermoregulating. So temperature control, artificial supply of warmth is important. Immunity and sterility. The kidneys and the urogenital system are not always fully developed. You may have a patent urachus, where the calf is urinating through the umbilical cord. And this needs to just be watched very, very carefully. We've had calves that have urinated through the umbilical cord for 10 days, and then developmentally, it just sorts itself out and the calf starts urinating normally. If there are problems, surgery and corrective stuff would obviously be necessary. In your preemies, the umbilical ring is still open, so you need to just monitor that for infection and for leakage. The suck reflex in your preemies is undeveloped, so they are more challenging in terms of feeding and greater risk if they do start suckling of aspiration pneumonia. Temperature and humidity control, have them on a soft surface and specialized care, but you can pull through these preemies with the right care. Next one. And then an additional one, these are not poaching babies, but over the last couple of years, we saw in KZN that we were getting a number of drought babies in as well. They can be, as you know, extremely compromised and may not in fact survive, but some of the drought babies can, with the right nursing, be pulled through. They have low birth weight and size, they're immune compromised, there are obviously some developmental issues. So they just need ongoing evaluation and veterinary input. We had one little girl that Dr. Mike Toff helped us with, and he monitored her for 2 days, and the calf was just incredibly undersized. She was tiny, and it was a relatively inexperienced mom, so she wasn't lying down to allow the calf to suckle. And the calf was just too small to reach up and suckle. And he then pulled her and brought her in. And she was a lot of work, a lot of challenges, but she made it and she's now back in the wild. So it can be done. Feeding, your hindgut fermenters, prone to GIT disturbances, very rapid growth. The calf doubles in birth weight from birth to 3 months and then from 3 to 6 months, high energy, frequent feeds. They suckle for 18 months to 2 years. They teeth at 40 to 70 days. With your rhinos, you want to avoid gastric tubing. They cannot vomit, but can regurgitate. And again, feeding routine as natural as possible. And if you have good carers and a good setup, you want to try and go for feeding on demand. It definitely improves the weight gain. Next one. Your milk formulations. Rhino milk contains less than 1% fat and is very high in milk sugars or lactose. So the best formulas are the fat-free milk powder that you mix according to the instructions and to which you add dextrose, lactose preferably if you can get it. We suggest 40 grams of dextrose per liter for your weak, your prem and your neonates, but obviously it needs to be fully hydrated before you go for that level of dextrose. And then 20 grams per liter in your larger calves up until about 3 months of age, and then you can stop the supplementation with that. With your white Rhino, you can put them onto Denkavit calf milk replacer. For some reason, we find that the calf milk replacer, they do better on than the Equid one. And whilst your Denkavit calf milk replacer is very, very high in fat, it's a vegetable fat, and they're able to tolerate vegetable fats, but not animal fats. With your black Rhino, if you can possibly do it, keep them on fat-free right the way through the weaning period. We have had black on the Denkavit calf milk, but it's best to keep them on the fat-free. And then probiotics, next one. Frequency and amounts. You want to support growth. You want to do frequent feedings as close as possible to the natural feeding pattern. The calf is with the mom all the time and suckles on and off as it wants to. You don't ever want the abdomen to be taut and uncomfortable. And then with calves, you find that they have that hunger reflex. So they'll suckle and suckle and suckle, and they'll finish their bottle. And then the message from the stomach to the brain hasn't quite connected, and they may keep demanding food. And you can very easily overfeed. So it takes about 20 minutes for that message to get through. So if the calf is still crying after 20 minutes, it's hungry, but you very often find that 20 minutes and they calm down. You're looking at 15 to 20% of body weight over a 24-hour period as a rough guideline. And then in your low babies, you may have to go as high as 25%. Quite often with rearing calves, you get a weight gain lag where the amount of milk they require, the volume is too high in order to satisfy them. And you don't want to cause colic and you don't want problems. So what you can do in those calves is do liquidized cooked oats and brown rice. And again, you don't want to go too much. You don't want to push your starches and carbohydrates up, but just adding some can push the weight up. And when they're going through that weight gain problem, the smaller, more frequent feeds actually help to push weight on. Next one. The value of suckling and milk. If you can possibly get your calf suckling, you want to get it suckling and not feeding from a bucket. There are so many advantages, not only the comfort factor, but the suckling stimulates peristaltic action and normal gut function. It's a bonding time where you actually have an ability to monitor and to check that calf. And it also stimulates the release of growth hormones. Milk is fantastic nutritional value. It's really easily digestible. It's a complete primary food. So there's a huge value to getting your calves onto milk, the suckling, and then also keeping them on milk for the normal weaning period and suckling period. Probiotics, the interesting one. There's lots of debates around this and lots of research on it. The probiotics can't do any harm, and that does have some benefits. But with Rhino, it must be hindgut specific. Again, I've wanted to cry when I see these beautiful Facebook posts of piles and piles of donations of probiotics for the calves, but they're not the equine ones. So really you want to go for the equine type, the Protexin Premium, the Saccharomyces yeast ones. And then what we've done with some of our very compromised calves is we've actually put their milk formula into a yogurt maker, and that has helped with digestion. And then just watch the vitamins and supplementation. Don't over supplement, and watch that your carers and your rehabbers aren't giving too many supplements. And then you really want to go for the equid or the wired hindgut suitable supplements. Teats and temperature. You want that teat to fit comfortably into the mouth and to form a seal. And the best way to sort of get an idea of what's needed is if you put your thumb into your mouth, close your mouth and suck hard, you'll feel that your thumb gets pushed against the roof of the mouth and it forms a seal. So you want a calf teat that is similar and forms that seal. The long, thick latex or silica ones are best. If the holes are too small and you've got a weak calf, he suckles too hard and then won't finish the bottle, he gets tired. If the holes are too large, they gulp air and there's a risk of aspiration pneumonia. And you find that the holes that are in the teats that you purchase are ideal for the very young calves. And then as the calves get older, you need to put slightly larger holes. Something as simple as a Coke bottle with a teat on, and you just roll the teat slightly to let air in, or there's some very fancy bottles that have their own vacuum outlets. And then your milk temperature, you want to go just above blood temperature. Next one. Weaning and feeding, your black rhino are browsers. There's huge amounts of really good captive information and care on captive feeding and diets. But with your black rhino browsers, they have higher protein requirements. They do need branches and bark. So you want to do some natural feeding as well. Think of the feeding position. Your black can move their head up and down. They don't have that heavy nutshell hump. Good quality lucerne for them, natural browse wherever possible, cubes, and a salt lick. Your white rhino are grazers. The neck muscles, again, prevent them from lifting their head, so food provisioning should accommodate that. Good mixtures of teff, eragrostis, and some lucerne, and horse cubes or game cubes. Like your equids, you need to be very careful using concentrates, not too much. And if you are using your concentrates, that they're introduced slowly. Fresh water available at all time, mineral mix, and where possible, the natural is best. Next one. Weaning, gradual process, introduced slowly. As soon as the teeth erupt, you need to have fibrous foods around so that they can start playing and feeling it. It's best to wean at the appropriate time, and your weaning period is usually equal to the gestation period. Don't wean too early, not too late. And we've mentioned as well the benefits of suckling and milk. Next one. Hygiene, absolutely critical, and this is where it's really important as the vet or the vet nurse that you're involved in or have insight into what's going on at the facility. So don't just look at the calf, actually go around and see how they're storing the food, how they're handling the prep, the quality of the food, the facilities, hygiene, how the handlers are operating. And then one little extra tip that we discovered with Rhino is when cleaning out the sleeping quarters. If you take everything out and you take all of their bedding and all of their dung, when they come back in, they make a concerted effort to replace all of that. Whereas if you leave some of the bedding, they don't start urinating and defecating all over straight away. Next one. I'm worried about the time, so we're going to quickly go through the health challenges that you see are linked to the poaching and rescue. And also adapting to captivity and the new conditions and rearing challenges. Next one. Ulcers, very common, gastric and other parts of the digestive tract. You want to do preventative after stress and pre-stress. Omeprazole works well, but can have side effects. Ranitidine very well. I'm not sure if it's still available in South Africa. And Alsonic is good, but obviously you don't want to do your Zantac and ranitidine together. You want at least an hour, hour and a half apart. Pneumonia, aspiration, and bacterial, very, very common. And your risk with Rhino is that they don't show symptoms of pneumonia until too late. So monitor very carefully for that. Diarrhea and constipation, they're very common and they swing between the two. So in both the treatment of diarrhea and constipation, you want to try and avoid those swings. E. coli and salmonella, very common causes. Digestive enzymes help. Fecal inoculation with fresh, healthy feces helps. And milk withdrawal, try and avoid if you possibly can. Rectal prolapse linked to diarrhea and constipation, very common. And then just bum burn, the acidic diarrhea watch for that. Other problems, urinary stasis and urinary tract infections. Buscopan can help to avoid those spasms and to help them pass feces and urine. You can't catheterize rhino and they urinate standing up. So if they're lying down, there can be an issue. Sinusitis also a problem. Colic, very, very, very common, linked the same with foals to dietary management, hydration and the rescue situation. Very easily becomes a chronic long-term problem. So you want to try and prevent it, identify what's causing the problems and prevent it becoming chronic. Sand colic and sand impaction. Calves in a poaching situation who are starving and hungry may eat mud. And then in captivity, dietary deficiencies, boredom and that type of thing may also lead to them eating sand. Okay, external parasites we've mentioned, acute thiamine deficiency, very common, and maladjustment syndrome in your white rhino. Next one. So after all that hard work and basic treatment and nursing and good veterinary care and appropriate mothering, what we want is release of healthy, viable, self-sustaining rhino into habitats in the wild who are able to breed, rear young and contribute to conservation, because every calf and every rhino counts. This is a black rhino female that was prem, that we were able to hand rear, and this is a photograph of her back in the wild with her calf. So it does work. There's my email and my telephone number. We have some rhino manuals available. Please feel free to contact me for any information and further questions that we can't handle now if we don't have time. Thank you, and please donate to the Wild Heart Rehab Center. They have a very soft spot in my heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Corin. It was really an interesting talk. I think we all learned that the basics are essential. Unfortunately, we don't have time for the questions now, but you can either email her or you can reach out to our social media pages if you have any questions, and then we will take it from there. And also, again, please consider donating. It's really for a good cause.
Good morning, everyone, and we'll be swiftly moving on to our second session of today's Run4Rhino webinar series. Our second session today will be with our guest speaker, Mr. Mario Smuts. Mr. Mario Smuts is a veterinary technologist and embryologist from the University of Pretoria, Department of Reproduction. We'd like to extend a very special welcome to Mr. Mario Smuts, who joins us this year for his second consecutive webinar series with us. And so if you feel so inclined, please like us on Facebook, scroll down and view his webinar from last year, which I imagine would be a good adjunct to today's talk. As you see appearing on your screen, Mr. Smuts has a very extensive list of qualifications, which you can quickly squiz through if you would like. On to today's talk. Today's talk is on assisted reproductive technologies as a tool for rhino conservation. If you have any questions or would like any comments answered, please use the Q&A section below rather than the general chat. All questions and comments will be answered at the end of today's talk. And so we would really encourage you to, if you have any questions, now is the time to ask them. And before we proceed with today's webinar series, we'd just like to remind everyone that donations are more than welcome. All donations are in support of Wild Heart's Rhino Rehab Center, and you can use the Paystacks link in the general chat. We also have merchandise for sale from the Run4Rhinos committee, and you can find us on social media for more information on this. And so without more to say from my side, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to Mr. Smuts, and I'm going to hand over the presentation to him now. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, for that kind introduction. Let me just try and set up my slideshow here. I hope you guys can see that.
It's perfect. Thank you, Mario.
Thank you. Right, as I said, thank you for the kind introduction. Also, congratulations to you and your Run4Rhinos team for the wonderful awareness platform that you are creating towards rhino conservation. I'm going to try and put another spin onto rhino conservation by taking you into a journey in the IVF laboratory today. Dr. Trender just gave an excellent speech about the infants of rhinos, and we are going to go further down into the micro part of the journey. So, as we know, assisted reproductive technologies has been used and applied in various species very successfully over the past couple of decades. Yet, only recently have we seen exciting developments and improvements for the development of these technologies for rhino conservation. Okay, so the goals of my talk this morning will quickly focus on why we should be concerned. Again, introduce you to the international rhino reproduction collaboration that we have here at OP, mention some of the breakthroughs and challenges that we face, demonstrate some of the tools and the procedures that we follow, and then highlight some research questions that needs to be answered. So, we are all aware that there's an ongoing mass extinction at unprecedented rates on our wildlife species. And most of this is caused by human actions. As with other wildlife species, we know now that the northern white rhino is basically one of the most endangered species in the world, with only the two remaining females, Nayan and Fatu, still alive. Unfortunately, we lost Sudan, the last rhino bull, northern white rhino bull, in 2018 due to health issues, and he had to be euthanized. We also know that there's a continued habitat destruction and fragmentation of our environment, and that leads to an increase of loss of biodiversity globally. Rhinos are poached for their horn, and as a result of that, we have a decrease in our gene pool diversity as well. As Dr. Trender also mentioned in her speech just now, unfortunately, a lot of times when we find pregnant cows that have been poached, the post-mortem also show that there's unborn calves still, the cow was pregnant, and if you think about it, we're actually losing 2 rhinos in one poaching. The Save the Rhino organization recently updated their numbers for the number of rhinos that's been poached, especially the African rhino. You can see the numbers up there in the right-hand corner from 2006 to 2020. And then we also realized that global populations declined from 500,000 rhinos at the start of the 20th century to current figures indicated below. And Dr. Jacques Odell also mentioned last night that the population numbers of the white rhino is between 19,000 to 20,000 at the current level. Quite concerning, because if we do not do something about this, we will end up with numbers similar to the northern white rhino. So the International Rhino Reproductive Collaboration was initiated by San Diego Zoo Global in 2018 and 2019. They recently changed their name to San Diego Wildlife Affiliation. And what this entailed was that a memorandum of understanding was drawn up between the University of Pretoria, Sandparks, Embryo Plus, Buffalo Dream Ranch, the Institute for Rhino Cryogenetics, and GeoLife. Our biggest aims are to increase the current understanding of rhinoceros reproductive physiology and endocrinology in order to develop in vitro rhinoceros-specific assisted reproductive technologies. We investigate methods to optimize gamete retrieval from post-mortem material or from live animals, develop survival rates of these oocytes or gametes when we bring them to the laboratories, improve maturation rates, embryo culture, and cryopreservation. Overall, we would like to play a huge role in saving all rhino species from going extinct. And I can just mention here that we are continuously in communication online with our international colleagues. We have bi-monthly meetings where we discuss progress and new challenges, and it's quite a wonderful team to be part of. Some recent breakthroughs that we are aware of. Just last week, I saw a new article mentioning that since 2019, the Biorescue Scientific Consortium collected 80 oocytes up to date from Nayun and Fatu, resulting in a total of 12 embryos already. Apparently, most of these embryos came from Fatu, the younger daughter. And as far as I know, they have attempted to transfer 1 or 2 of these embryos back to recipients, but unfortunately, there was no pregnancies from those. This consortium is a multinational effort involving Berlin's Leipzig Institute for Zoo and Wildlife Research, as well as the Avantia laboratory in Italy. And in a recent publication, I noticed that their network consists of about 13 international institutes, a wonderful networking system. And I hope we can one day become part of that as well. Also, the conservationists from San Diego Zoo Institute for Conservation Research, in collaboration with the Center of Regenerative Medicine at the Scripps Research Institute, recently managed to turn rhino stem cells into beating cardiac tissue. What a phenomenal breakthrough. And furthermore, they also successfully bred southern white rhino offspring recently by making use of artificial insemination techniques by using frozen sperm. Very exciting news in the field of assisted reproduction. Locally, we are working close together as part of this collaboration. Dr. Monet de la Roy and his Rhino Repro team have spent tremendous hours and costs to develop aspiration handle and probe that they can use to successfully recover oocytes from ovum pickup techniques on live rhino cows. And together, we are also using a step-by-step improvement of temperature shock during transport, increased maturation rates, and insemination techniques to try and develop and improve our culturing methods that we use when we obtain these oocytes. So what is the obstacles that we endure? First of all, location. You know, the 2 laboratories that's actively involved in trying to grow these embryos in vitro is the one at the University of Pretoria and also the laboratory at EmbryoPlus. The availability of our ovarian material and gametes are quite demanding, and we don't get a lot of them. We harvest oocytes from live animals, as I mentioned, and then also from post-mortem animals, or in our quality control from abattoir material. Unfortunately, animals that died from poaching, we haven't been able to obtain a lot of ovaries from these animals, because by the time most of these carcasses are found, rigor mortis has already stepped in, and it is quite difficult to remove these ovaries and try and create something from it. We also know that there's quite a large investigation involved in all of these postmortems, and Dr. Trender also mentioned that it's quite sensitive. So it's really a sad thing that we can't obtain more ovaries from these animals and try and save the genetic material from these carcasses. We also need to do in-depth knowledge of reproductive anatomy and physiology of these animals. There's not much available on these species. This will help us to optimize our oocyte pickup techniques further. It will create a platform where we can determine the effect of temperature fluctuations on oocyte viability. We need to investigate and overcome the vulnerability of these oocytes toward in vitro culture conditions, and develop and optimize culture media protocols to keep oocytes viable until we can actually work with them in laboratories. Once we get to a point where we can actually grow these embryos, we would be able to also investigate and try to overcome cryo damage that would potentially cause stress to these oocytes and embryos. Unfortunately, we also have limited dedicated veterinary reproductive specialists involved in this project. At this point, Monet de Lorey is the only person who is capable of retrieving oocytes from live rhino cows. We have limited skilled embryologists in the country that can focus on this type of work, as well as physiologists. And I think it's important to expand our network to other scientists that could assist us in developing these techniques on a very faster basis. I also need to mention that the costs are quite impressive. I've recently been told that one OPU session, going out for a specific day to do OPU, calculates to about 30,000 Rand per day. Enormous amounts of money involved. Then it is followed by the cost for the in vitro fertilization procedures, transport to get the oocytes and gametes to our laboratories, the very sophisticated equipment that we need, and then also grants for research. So to summarize all these obstacles that we are dealing with, I would like to, I think the quote from Dr. Terry Roth, Director of Cincinnati Zoo and Botanical Gardens Center for Conservation and Research of Endangered Wildlife, is quite appropriate, where it was said that it is a long path from developing a berry-like cluster of cells in a petri dish to having a herd of healthy rhinos on the ground. Hopefully, we will be able to achieve that in the near future. So what is the advantages of artificial reproduction technologies? First of all, we can increase the progeny of a specific species, and we can also improve the genetic contribution to the gene pool by the female animals. Eventually, ARTS will also assist us to conserve genes from genetically superior animals. If you have a rhino cow with a proven history of good fertility, and she might become very old or even injured and maybe needs to be euthanized, then it would be fantastic to have access to those ovaries so that we can cryopreserve the oocytes or the developing embryos for biobanking purposes, so that we can in future make use of this stored genetic material. Also, we would love to get to a situation where we would be able to export and import reproductive material from various rhino animals that we can share with our collaborators in the international market, so that we can speed up the process for artificial reproduction technologies in rhino species. And then we need to improve networking to save the species from extinction. So retrieving oocytes by ovum pickup from rhinos is quite different from the procedures that we do in bovine. In bovine, we basically have the cow standing up in a crash. We apply local anesthesia to the cochlear tail vein, and then the veterinarian is able to harvest the oocytes from the ovaries via transvaginal oocyte recovery. On the right-hand corner here, you can see the aspiration tool that we use. The ultrasound probe fits snugly into the probe, and then we have a unit up there containing the aspiration needle with a fine tube connected to an aspiration pump, where we then aspirate the oocytes into holding media, and the veterinarian can then also visualize the ovaries on the screen of the ultrasound machine, and then aspirate the follicular fluid containing the oocytes one by one before handing it over to the embryologist. In rhinos, it's quite different. Here we have to apply general anesthesia to these animals, and we also have to use a different type of aspiration handle that was developed by Dr. Monet and his team. You can obviously see that the size and dimensions of this aspiration tool is quite dramatically different from what we use in domestic species. The reason for this is the anatomy of the rhino is quite different from the domestic animals, and the ovaries are anatomically so deep into the body cavity that you can barely reach them by hand. So this probe was developed, and through a network of different aspiration tubes, Dr. Monet is able to use a double lumen needle to aspirate follicles from the ovaries. And in this case, we also have to aspirate one follicle a couple of times because it's not as easy to recover the cumulus oocyte complexes from the follicle as in the case with bovines. Once the cumulus oocyte complexes is then aspirated, they go into containers with media. It's handed over to Carla, embryologist of the Rhino Repro team, and she immediately starts searching through the media for the oocyte complexes. And here you can see a picture of two oocyte complexes that was recovered from rhinos through OPU during a recent OPU session. Now, to evaluate the temperature effect that we might experience, and it might have an effect on the oocytes in the development of these oocytes, we recently was very exciting to get Ms. Liamay Moret, our first master student, involved. She's focusing on the effect of the temperature variation of aspiration fluid on in vitro oocyte maturation. I have yet to meet another MSc student that is so inquisitive and passionate about what she does. We are very happy to have her on the team. So what Liamay is busy doing is she is using various types of temperature monitoring devices. For instance, in this picture here, she uses eye buttons that is fixed onto the aspiration tool, and she can basically record all the temperatures from within the rhino at the site of aspiration, in the rectum, in the mouth, ambient temperatures, temperatures of the media where we aspirate the oocytes in, the temperatures during the search of the oocytes in the mobile laboratory, temperatures recorded in the transportation incubators that's used, and depending on the protocol that we use on a specific day, also the transport boxes that we use to transfer these oocytes back to the laboratory. We use two different types of protocols to see which one will give us the better results. And it's a good comparison study that's currently being performed. Right, the IVF laboratory at Onderstepoort, we are very pleased and appreciative for the University of Pretoria, who assisted Professor Dietmar Holm, myself, and Professor Henry Annandale to create this wonderful laboratory. As you can see, we have quite a lot of specialized equipment in here. We have the incubators at the back there where we culture the embryos in. We have a various type of microscopes, stereo, phase contrast, fluorescent microscope, and also our inverted microscope here in the front that we use for micro-manipulating procedures. And then also we added a in vitro IVF workstation that assists us with handling the oocytes and conditions while they are out of the incubator. And then lastly, another note on this laboratory, we work in very, very clean air because we have an excellent air conditioning system up on the roof. consisting of bag filters, HEPA filters, so the environment inside of the laboratory are really clean. To take you through the summary of the IVF process very quickly, as I mentioned, we can aspirate oocytes from ovaries in different methods, either from live rhino cows or from ovaries that we obtain from post-mortem cases or from poached animals. And we also use abattoir material from other species as a control for our laboratory. So on day -1, we perform the ovum pickup. As soon as we have those cumulus oocyte complexes recovered, we grade them, and then we transfer them into a maturation dish where we will have the embryos or the oocytes mature. I will get into more detail in a couple of slides on that just now. Once the oocytes are matured, we will then also prepare good quality sperm samples. We want to concentrate highly progressive motile sperm samples for the use of our insemination process. On day 0, we will then inseminate the oocytes, followed by fertilization or cleavage check 24 to 48 hours after insemination. And then we use various type of media to culture these embryos through to day 8, 9, and 10 in the hope to create some blastocysts that can either be transferred back into recipients or that can be cryopreserved or vitrified for later use. Cumulus oocyte complexes are quite different from various species. In the top picture here, you can see some of the COCs that are aspirated from abattoir material from equines. And then in the bottom picture, again, some of the COCs that we aspirated from OPU sessions on rhinos. Now, in order for us to determine when the oocytes are actually matured, we need to go through a process of maturing them, and there's different protocols followed for different species. In cattle, for instance, the maturation period is anything from 20 to 24 hours. In equines, we mature the oocytes for 36 hours. And then in the rhino species, interesting, it takes 40 to 42 hours for us to actually determine which of those oocytes matured. As you all know, the maturation process involved the first meiotic division that the oocytes need to go through. And then as part of the meiotic division, the oocyte will split into 2. The cytoplasma of the oocyte is kept in one of the cells, and the other cell is then pushed out as a little bubble that you can see there, and we call that the polar body of the oocyte. We have been struggling for quite some time since we started doing the assisted reproduction process with the rhino oocytes to get these oocytes to this point. And Carla Herps from EmbryoPrest played around with the media as we do on a constant basis, and by changing tiny bits at a time, she actually created a media that we now can have constant and repeated maturation on the rhino oocytes. This is a huge breakthrough for the team, and we congratulate Carla for that enormous technique and investment that she did there to assist us to get to this point. There's 2 methods that we can use to inseminate or fertilize oocytes. First of all, we have the standard insemination techniques, where we basically take a good quality progressively motile sperm sample, and we basically add it to a drop of media containing some of the oocytes, and the sperm need to swim and burrow through the cumulus cells and fertilize the oocytes by themselves. This is normally the technique that's been used for domestic species. However, in rhino species, wildlife species, and also, interesting, the equine species, oocytes do not fertilize by simple standard insemination, and a technique called intracytoplasmic sperm injection was developed. For this, you need very sophisticated, precise micromanipulator units to be able to perform this technique accurately. In this picture, you can see the Leica system that was implemented at the University of Pretoria's IVF lab here at Honest. The system makes use of micromanipulators that is very, very sensitive to micro movements. It's placed on an anti-vibration table to make sure that the platform where you're actually performing the insemination stays stable during the whole process. Even if somebody would bump me while I'm doing the procedure, the platform will stay 100% stable. Teaching somebody to perform this procedure is quite difficult because you have to understand that you're working in different focal planes. When you catch the sperm cells for the fertilization process, you have to work on the bottom of the dish, and then when you eventually have to inject the oocyte, you work in a three-dimensional space, and you have to align your needles and your oocyte precisely in order to get good fertilization. Now, this slide will demonstrate the difference in the diameter of the tip of the ICSI needle and one of our hairs. The tip of the ICSI needle, the inner diameter is 5 microns, and a sperm cell can basically just fit in there. The outer diameter is 7 micrometers, and it's quite tiny, barely visible with the naked eye. To enable us to get the sperm cells into the needle, we place them in a syrup-type medium to immobilize them so that we can first at all slow them down dramatically, and then by nicking the tail of the sperm cell when it swims past the front edge of the needle, you can then immobilize them and then pick them up, preferably with the head towards the front of the needle. Once you have the oocyte in the sperm cell in the ICSI needle, you can move over to your oocyte, and now you have to focus on the oocyte and get your alignment right. There's many different preferences in where to keep and how to hold the oocyte in position. Here you will see the holding needle with the oocyte, which is approximately 200 to 250 microns in diameter. We keep the polar body at the 6 o'clock position, or you can also keep it at the 12 o'clock position. And the basic reason for that is that if you would enter the oocyte from the 3 o'clock position, you will have limited opportunities to damage the meiotic spindle inside the cytoplasma of the oocyte. So once we have the sperm ready, we gently go through the zona pellucida of the oocyte, through the perivitelline space, and then we reach the inner vitelline membrane surrounding the cytoplasma. This membrane does not break very easily, and we basically have to aspirate backwards into the needle to break this membrane before we can actually deposit the sperm cell in the oocyte. This is a technique that you have to be very careful about. If you aspirate too fast, you will suck out quite a lot of the cytoplasma, damaging the meiotic spindle, resulting in death of the oocyte. So once this membrane is broken, you can then proceed forward, and then eventually you deposit the sperm cell in the oocyte, withdraw the needle, and then you're ready to do the next one. The next video clip is taken from one of the rhino oocytes that I recently ICSI'd. I just want to show you how fast the actual insemination process takes. take note of the sperm cell in the needle. I'm bringing it right to the front of the needle. I don't want to inject too much media into the oocyte. The polar body at the 12 o'clock position. Now you will see the very fast inserting into there, the membrane broke, and now we are going to deposit the sperm cell in the oocyte, and the ICSI procedure is performed. How do we assess fertilization? I first want to draw your attention to the dark coloring of this rhino oocyte in comparison with the oocytes from humans. For some other reason, and we believe it has to do with the lipoprotein content of the oocytes of animals, the oocytes are quite dark, and we cannot visualize pronuclear bodies very easily during the fertilization assessment. Normal fertilization in human embryos can very easily be determined by the presence of two pronuclei, the larger one representing the genetic of the sperm cell, and the smaller one, the egg. And then also we look out for two polar bodies, meaning that after fertilization, the oocyte went through its second meiotic division, the cell divided again, and a second polar body has been extruded to the perivitelline space. From here on, the embryo or the zygote will start cleaving. Sometimes in standard insemination cases, you can also see that if the oocyte lockdown procedure or shutdown procedure is not functioning well, then the possibility is there for a second sperm cell to enter the oocyte, and then you get abnormal fertilization represented by free PNs. And then obviously unfertilized oocytes where you only have the one polar body and no evidence of polar bodies. Now, we are currently having a cleavage block with the process that we are trying to do with rhino oocytes, and we are working meticulously to find reasons and find systems to help us to get these rhino oocytes to cleave. And we recently introduced a number of staining techniques. Leah May, our MSc student, is doing excellent work on this as well. She practiced all the staining techniques over the last couple of months, and we used the acetoarsine stain, this red one on this side, where we can basically try and focus on the nucleus of the oocytes, as well as the DAPI stain that we use with the fluorescent microscope in our lab, where we can see the nucleus envelope and the DNA fragments condensing in the specific oocyte. And the main reason why we do this is we want to try and evaluate at what maturation stage were these oocytes when they stop growing. Okay, so development stages of all the embryos. At this point with the rhinos, we are still trying to get these embryos to cleave, as I mentioned, but in the normal process, we would expect the embryos to be anything from 2 to 4 cells on day 2 and 3. They continue to become 8-cell embryos on day 4. Go on to morula stage, basically meaning that there's so many cells in the embryo that we can't count them anymore. They then start developing into early blastocysts. For the first time, the blastocele is opening up, and then the embryotic cells is concentrating into an inner cell mass in the center of the embryo. As they continue, you will see that the zona pellucida is actually thinning quite well, and then eventually the zona pellucida will break open, the embryo will be expelled, and then they can implant into the uterine lining of the uterus. These two stages are the two stages that we prefer to have the embryos at the time of cryopreservation or transfer back into the recipient. Okay, so the slide that I'm having up here now is embryos of equine oocytes that I've been able to develop in this laboratory. We use equines as a model for rhinos because they are very far back genetically related to each other. And we use equines if we can obtain ovaries to test our media protocols and to also do quality controls in our laboratory. It's important to have continuous growth of embryos so that once we obtain these rhino oocytes, we are sure that our processes is not the reason for the rhino embryos not to grow. And we continuously do these quality checks. When we get to the point where these, like we currently have, where these embryos are not growing, we now know we need to go and search for other additional actions to try and solve the cleavage block that we are experiencing. The development of the embryos up above the yellow line basically represents the stages of the embryos when they are in the fallopian tube of the animal, and then down below the green, the yellow line, you will see the stages that you will normally find in the uterus of the female. Just want to draw your attention to this little embryo here. You will see that the embryo actually collapsed within the zona pellucida. That is typically a scenario that we see when we cryopreserve or vitrify embryos. They collapse, and then when you thaw them out afterwards and put them back into the incubator, after about 20 to 30 minutes, they will have re-expanded totally, so it's not damage caused to the embryo. Once they are totally expanded, as I mentioned, they will then break out from the zona pellucida, and then when they totally hatched out, they will then be ready to be implanted in the uterine wall of the recipient. Right. There's a lot of stuff that we still don't know. And I think we are only at the tip of the iceberg regarding using artificial reproductive techniques for our wildlife and rhino species. For instance, there's limited information available on the effect of stress on oocyte development competence. We don't know what effect does the actual maybe chasing of a rhino to get a darted have on the actual oocyte development stages. I have to mention that in our international countries, a lot of these techniques are done on zoo animals, where they have zoo breeding programs versus the wild roaming rhinos that we have in South Africa, and they are not easily accessible to dart. We also need to investigate what the chemical immobilization effect on these oocyte development would be. Limited information available on this. Evaluate signaling pathways for follicular development in this rhino species. Endocrine monitoring of steroid metabolites for assessing ovarian cyclicity, infertility, pregnancy, and optimal timing for reproductive inventions. There's limited information available. Yes, we know that there's a lot of information and research being done on the immobilization side, but we still don't know how it influences embryo development, especially when you start talking about in vitro development. In the meantime, we are further optimizing OPU techniques, transport techniques of the oocytes from in the field and post-mortem harvested ovarian tissue samples. And we want to try and optimize gamete survival and viability of these oocytes. We are improving in vitro culture protocols, and we are now also going to investigate different activation techniques to overcome this cleavage block that I was talking about. There's different techniques that we can start using, maybe activation by calcium ionophore or electro activation. We need a lot of people to assist us in this field of the research. Once we are able to grow these embryos, we will be able to investigate the effect of vitrification of these oocytes and embryos. We need to investigate the permeability of the cell membranes and how it will react to cryoprotectants. We need to investigate the toxicity effects that might be involved from the cryoprotectant use. And we also need to investigate the tolerance and osmotic variation or osmotic shock that these oocytes will be experiencing when we try and do these procedures. There's a lot of research also to be done on the effects of the cooling and freezing temperatures during this process. So to conclude, I think we have in the last year made tremendous progress with the limited sources that we have of this material. We are slowly but surely expanding our group of scientists that could assist us. We are very grateful for the assistance that we get from San Diego and their reproductive team. And we are also hopeful that our passion and dedication will ignite more interest in some of the veterinary and natural science students to become involved with us in this quest for applying art as a tool for rhino conservation. I strongly believe that it's a matter of time that we will be able to make a difference, and together we will make this difference. And remember, guys, for me personally, it's not about who's going to be the first one who develops in vitro embryos from 4 rhinos. It's about saving the species from extinction by developing these techniques. Thank you so much. I hope this was quite informative for you guys who is not involved in the laboratory side of these processes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mario. I'd just like to quickly thank you from our side. And I think I speak for everyone when I say that it's really been a fascinating journey into this microcellular level of your intracytoplasmic sperm injection. I think for all of us, it's really interesting, even though we might not be directly involved. It's super interesting to understand and have a sort of an insight into your work. And we can hear the passion and your drive for this, and it really is inspiring to all of us. And I think we can see in the chat section as well, you're also getting lots of messages saying, really awesome, thank you, Mario. And so before we conclude with a short intermission and video, we would just like to ask you a couple of questions. And so my first question is that, do you see any sort of species differences within the rhino species, between a black and a white rhino, and how does that affect your work, or is this another area of study as well?
Andrew, yes. Unfortunately, at this point of time, we have only been able to recover or receive oocytes from the white rhino. I have not been able to perform these techniques on black rhino samples. So yes, it's open. It's something we will have to look in. We don't know yet.
Thanks for that interesting talk. I also just have one question. So how often overall do you sample, and do you sample more than once on a cow?
Yes, so obviously, let me first start with the post-mortem samples. Unfortunately, COVID-19 has also had a huge negative effect on our production. During this year, so far, we only received 4 ovaries from post-mortem cases. And then talking about the OPU sessions, we are currently in the vicinity of about 19 to 20 OPU sessions that was performed during this year. We do aspirate cows repeatedly, but obviously we give them quite a good period for between the 2 OPU sessions. And then Dr. Moray and his team is also capable of aspirating more than 1 cow in a day. So yeah, we wish to do way more than that, but you also have to remember that all of us involved in this process is this is not our only job that we have. We also have other tasks in our facilities and our businesses, in our departments. So we try and do as many as possible. Yeah, up to about 20 aspirations this year so far.
Thank you. I think it's exceptionally interesting. And just one more question on that note. So from your side, what would you say the biggest bottleneck in this community and the research community is in terms of this research? I know you've mentioned a few things. Would you say a big bottleneck is the funds or the availability of the reproductive material, or just simply manpower and expertise?
I think one of the biggest issues is availability of material. If we can obtain ovarian material from more animals that die from other locations, at this stage, our main suppliers is Kruger National Park and Buffalo Dream Ranch. Yes, it's a sensitive situation, but if we can obtain more post-mortem material, it would really help us to develop and grow faster. And then also the availability of manpower. I must tell you, since the MSc students started with me personally here at Onderstepoort, we've made so much more progress because there's just another pair of hands available. Unfortunately, if you're one person, you cannot do all of this stuff all at the same time. And the more students we can enroll to focus on different areas of this research will be a fantastic opportunity.
All right, and one more question from my side, and I just want to ask, what would you see the most valuable application of your assisted reproductive technology? Would it be in sort of spreading genes instead of transporting rhinos? You can spread the genes. Or would it rather be in sort of saving a species on the brink of extinction? Or can you just talk a bit quickly about that?
Andrew, if we look at the northern white rhino, we don't want to get into a situation where our southern white rhinos also become so extinct that we have to battle to try and eventually bring back a species. We need to save this genetic material for future use and make sure that when we get to the point where our white population are also reduced to very low numbers, that we can actually have this biobank material and that we can actually save this species as well. And then, yes, it would be wonderful if we can get repeatability in. We are quite far still from getting valuable embryo or viable embryos transferred back into rhino cows to see if we're actually going to get pregnancies. And imagine if we reach that stage, then we can also use this technique to grow the population again. But the main aim at this stage is to try and save the rhino species from extinction.
And I understand that it's still small steps, and this might be a little bit, this might be running before you're walking. But how do you see the challenges, and what are the sort of the lifespan if you do cryopreserve these genetic material, and how long could this cryopreservation last for, and how would you then what major challenges are there in terms of re-implanting this into cows in the future?
Andrew, if I think about other species, embryos, I was privileged to have a baby boy in my hands of embryos that was frozen 13 years before I even started doing IVF. In the time when I was working in a human IVF lab in the USA. So to answer your question is, if you successfully freeze these embryos away and you maintain the liquid nitrogen flask where they are stored in, nothing can happen to these embryos. I am also involved in semen freezing, and I can tell you stories of many litters that's been born from various, for instance, dog species of semen that was frozen in 1979. We recently transferred those, or inseminated the bitch with that semen, and she had 12 pups. So if the cryopreservation technique and the storage and the biobanking is maintained properly, I am sure you will be able to make use of this material for ages to come. Yeah, and then on the transfer of the embryos back to the recipients, that's a huge research topic that we still have to address when we get to that point. I mentioned that we need to look at all the different metabolites and stuff that's involved in determining cyclicity and stuff. And that's a process that's still lying ahead for us to determine what exactly will we have to do to get the optimal conditions for these embryos to result in pregnancies.
Right, and I think that I speak for everyone when I say this is incredibly exciting research and really on the cutting edge, and we all will hopefully be following very closely. And we wish you and the entire research community as a whole, the best going forward. And I don't know if we have any other final questions before we conclude today's talk. But from my side, I would just like to say a huge thank you, not only for your time, but for your humbling expertise.
Thank you so much. Much appreciated.
And quickly, before this last video plays, we'd just like to re-encourage everyone that donations are still open. You can follow the paysnacks.com link in the general chat. All donations are in support of Wild Hearts Rehab Center, and really do go to a great cause and make a huge difference, and is in a way to give back to not necessarily the reproduction of rhinos, but in a way to support rhino conservation in general. So thank you for everyone who is attending at home and watching this, and we'll be back after a short break and interlude before we continue with our third speaker of today.
and thank you for visiting and attending our webinar. We would really like to re-encourage you again to maybe to sponsor us, or you can buy some of our merchandise. We really do appreciate that you are attending our webinar series. We have our next speaker, who is Vian from the Linda. He's currently very involved with Wild House Rehab Center, the organization we are sponsoring this year. Vian was vice president of WRSA in 2014 and 2016. He's currently serving on the board of WRSA as of 2008, and he will be talking about how legal horn trading can help with conservation and the rhino industry. If you have any questions, please put it in a Q&A, and then we will ask you after Vian has finished his talk. Thank you, and here's Vian van der Linde.
That's right. Hi, Leonie. Can I start?
You can start, Rian.
Okay. Hi to everyone, and yeah, thank you for the opportunity first of all, and more so for the opportunity to share my view and opinion a little bit about the rhino crisis that we all experience. I think anyone that is involved today and anyone that's listening, you know, have the stake and the interest of the rhino at stake, and all of us want to achieve the same end goal, and that is to make sure that we protect the rhino for generations to come. I think because it's such an emotional issue, that a lot of personal opinions have taken over the past 12 years, and we were so focused on each one's opinion that I think that we lost the track a little bit. And that counts for everyone that's involved, because I don't think there's one golden line or one decision that will save the rhino. I think it's a mix of it all, and I think there's place for everyone's opinion, but we need to get as quickly as possible around the same table and agree that we walk towards the same goal and respect each other's opinions and maybe the way we think we must do it. I'm not going to go through this presentation word by word. I would rather share my experience a little bit, because if you look at this, then I think some of the audience will feel, but this is absolute information that suit the cause for the pro-trade group within the people that want to save the rhino. But it is important that we look at the stats. It is important that we see where we started, but it's more important that we realize where we are now and how quickly we're going back to the same number of rhinos that we've had in 1910, and that is about 110 years ago. It is, and we can argue that it all started in 2008 when the ban on trade was imposed, or whatever the reason is. But one thing that we have done and that we have achieved since 2008 is that we totally devalued a rhino. We've created a market, an illegal market, that we will never stop. There's no way that we can have enough time through education to stop rhino poaching. There will be no rhinos left by the time we have achieved it. I'm not saying that we mustn't do that. I think that's one of the things that must be done parallel to all the other things that we're doing. I think in some of the other talks that you've listened to, it was clear that by dehorning rhino, there's no risk for the animal. It's a simple procedure. It's actually very quick, and it can be done by doing other procedures as well, by collecting information, by drawing blood, by look at the health status of your animals. Then you can cut the horn and dehorn the rhino, wake it up, and between 2 and 3 years, you can do it again. I think the most important thing of that is that we must look, there's two different platforms. And I think the first platform is a platform where everyone that's paying tax, everyone that loves animals, everyone that is donating towards the conservation of the wildlife of Africa have a say in how it must be managed. And there I refer to our national parks and our provincial parks. I think there we have the absolute right to make sure we have a pure driven conservation entities that look after the rhinos. And I think we must, within reason, keep them responsible for the successes and congratulate them on that, but also within reason, be fair, and we must be able to criticize and to put pressure on the authorities to do more to save those rhinos that we all pay for in our parks. But then the other platform, and I think that's maybe sometimes where we get lost, is that there we must remember that people have spent a lot of money, private people, to protect the rhino. Doesn't matter what the primary reason is. If it's not financially or economically driven, nobody would have done it. But at the end of the day, there will be more rhinos. At the end of the day, the rhinos is well looked after. And it's difficult for me to understand how people want to set the same rules for our parks than for private owners who paid their own way, who's paying their own security, who bought the animal legally, moved it legally, and look after them. And the way it went the past couple of years even put his family and his staff and everyone's lives at risk, because your whole life have changed. It's not just having a rhino, to look at it at the waterhole and get goosebumps and feel good of what you've done, but to stay awake at night, to know a full moon is never beautiful anymore, to know that there's people with rifles walking on your ranch. It's a total change of lifestyle. And still, the further we go into this sad situation, losing more rhinos, the more negative comments have been made on the private owners, where I think we must really look and see, are we going to decide to save the rhino? Are we going to allow the rhino to save himself? Because we can argue with our petty arguments and do whatever, but the rhino's got one thing, a renewable product, whatever you want to call it, that can be used, can be utilized, can generate a huge income, can generate a lot of work, and can bring foreign currency in a legal way into our country, and the rhino will be saved. Or we can go on in the same way we're doing now, and be very naive, and we will sit without rhinos, or maybe rhinos in zoos, and that will be a very sad day. And if we don't believe the numbers, then we must also think a little bit what happened in Kruger. That's an amazing place. And unfortunately, the way things changed in Africa, unfortunately situated next to the wrong country, and that's Mozambique. And the pressure there is about unstoppable. But the numbers that we're getting is definitely not the exact numbers, because we must remember, if a rhino cow is being poached, the calf is not written down his mortality or death as a poached rhino. It's a natural mortality. So we might think we lose 10, but we lose 16 at the end. And I can tell you now that the rhino population in our parks is under immense pressure. The money that's supposed to go for conservation of a lot of other species is being used just to save the rhino. And therefore, rhinos is not the favorite animal under the scientists anymore. And I can believe that. And it's not something that I suck out of thumb. And I think I've said enough. And I just want to emphasize again, is that I am not thinking that the legalizing of rhino on trade is the only way to save it. I don't have any problem with my neighbor that believe or think he will never dehorn his rhino. That is absolutely his choice, and I respect that. But I think if we're not going to stand together and say there's a place for every opinion, but there must be only one aim, and that is to save the rhino. And I think dehorning, legalized trade, is one of the options. And I think there is enough land in Southern Africa, and there's enough will, and there's even enough funding that through all of this, that we can be far to the left and far to the right and meet each other in the middle and make sure in 40 years from now we have still wild populations of rhino. Because I can tell you, I know about more people that want to sell their rhino and get rid of their rhino than people that want to buy a rhino. And if we don't turn that around, it is the writing is on the wall. Yeah, I'm not going to go into all this, the stats and everything. Anyone is welcome to ask me a question, or let's just discuss it and the different options. And if I've missed something, please ask me about it, and I would be very happy to answer any questions. Leonie?
Hi, Björn.
Hi, hello.
Hi, so I think there's just, from our side, I think we have a couple of questions that we are thinking about. And one of those questions is, what sort of adjuncts, besides, besides dehorning and the horn trade, what sort of other adjuncts do you need to maintain a safe and secure population of rhinos protected from poachers and that kind of thing? What would you recommend in addition to this?
I mean, I think, there's actually what I was referring to is that, we must stop criticizing each other on what we think is right or wrong to save the rhino. If I take my own situation, when I started rhino, I bought a rhino cow. I think at that stage, the value for a cow and a calf was up to 650,000 Rand. And you know that just by getting more rhino and be able to sell onto new ranches again was good enough, because we didn't have this extra cost. I mean, to protect your rhino, I mean, you're talking about hundreds of thousands a month. And it's not enough. And it's not just that, because everyone, if you talk about rhino, they look at different direction. So now the value, you buy cows and calves now for 120, 140,000. It's crazy. If we look how rare they are, how special animals they are, they don't have any value. We can't get permits. Well, the permit system has been made about impossible to utilize the other avenues of generating an income. And I think if you look at Kruger alone, and we were involved in that, we moved, I want to say, hundreds of rhino every second year that they were selling into the private industry. And that was part of their cash flow and their budget. And that's been taken away. But their cost for their anti-poaching program is just increasing, and there's no different in the private sector. So I just think is that at this moment, donors' money is going one way. It's going the way of, if you look at people that can't afford anymore their view on trade, they don't receive a cent from donors. I mean, if you're a private owner, you don't receive a cent from donors, but you must protect the rhino. So what I'm saying is that let's sit together and say, listen, this is a good project. Let's use those money all across the board. Let's utilize the donors' money. Let's utilize the NGOs' money. Let's play this game together, and pull together, although we're different. I mean, but there's no time anymore to differ. I mean, that's my concern.
And I completely agree. I think am I summarizing sort of what you're saying by saying that, there's such an undesirability in owning rhinos, with the risk factor, with the expense of protecting them, and also imagine the emotional trauma of, having to fear about, the life of your animals, that you want to give rhinos a value, a greater value than just keeping them, because you want to make it desirable to own and care for rhinos and increase the value of having them on your land and protecting them. If you could do that, that would be a way of encouraging more conservation and encouraging people to keep rhino.
I agree with you, Andrew. I think that is, you said it perfectly. I mean, we must make people want to keep rhino. I mean, everyone wants to save rhino, but to keep it is a different story. And then that's really a different story. And there's a few places that's doing it. I'm not sure how long we'll be able to still do it. I mean, because you have to make tough decisions in the next couple of years. If there's no support won't come from government. In Africa, our governments have other challenges. Our people are starving. There's poverty. Animals, we must look after them, or we must start to look after the people well enough that it's important for them to look after the animals, but we're far from there.
And I think this point's kind of emphasized by I believe it was Dr. Odell yesterday who said that if we fail to protect rhinos, rhino, the big poster animal of conservation in Southern Africa, what does that leave us? How on earth can we be then expected to protect the smaller lizards and the pangolins and those things? If we can't even protect the rhinos. So I think it's really important, and I think it's rhino conservation has to be sort of a poster child for the whole conservation industry.
Oh, I agree with you.
Okay, Vian, we have a question here from James Larkin. Okay, he says, to sell horn, there would need to be a number of very important changes. Number one, the rhino would need to be moved to a different list on the CITES, CITES schedule, requiring a positive vote of 75%. Number two, there would need to be a change in the laws of all the countries involved, namely Vietnam, China, Southern Africa, and all the countries through which horn needs to be moved. Number three, some mechanisms for sale needs to be developed that allows the sale of the horn. Currently, any legal sales from South Africa would have to be at a cost cheaper than that which is currently paid for poached horn.
Yeah, only thank you. Yeah, I think we must be very careful. I don't think the uplisting of any species, and I must be careful if I say it, I can't say of any, have saved that species. Because over-regulating is not going to make the value higher. I think there must be controlled legal trade of a certain percentage of a species to create the value. And that's why I'm saying, we must remember we sit with two populations of rhino. We sit with the population of rhino in our national and provincial parks, and then we sit with the population in our private parks. And that's an easy split that we can do. But I don't want to take the possibility of a revenue generator for the government away. I mean, that can be sit and discussed. But I don't believe that over-regulating is going to increase the value of anything. And I think we must make it easier to look after the rhino. And if you work on a controlled quota system, you must remember, as soon as you uplist an animal, the quota system is being decided by people outside South Africa. We can't allow, and I'm really sorry for all, with a lot of respect for the people that's not South Africans or not having rhino. It's difficult for me to accept that people can have an influence with a vote on what I must do, looking after those animals 24/7 and paying for it. Yes, we can have a say, and we can have maybe express our opinions and give advice and whatever. But at the end, we've just said now, we as South Africans must save our rhino. We want to create a healthy population, and we must make those decisions. We can't I don't want to decide on a stag in New Zealand or a mountain sheep, wherever. It's nothing to do with me. I mean, I will support those people in their decisions. But we in Africa and South Africa must really take full responsibility. And we must blame ourselves at the end if we can't make it work. But over-regulating is not is not the solution. We've seen it in many other African countries. You must make very sure that you work on a quota controlled, regulated quota system, not by uplisting species at CITES. CITES, the meaning of CITES is the Convention of International Trade in Endangered Species. It's not the stop of trade in endangered species. It's and we must understand that. So, but it's unfortunately CITES is not the organization that it was when it was started. It lost its way on the way, and that's not I don't think we must go there, because let's talk about rhino.
Okay, he commented now, that's the problem, the controlled sale. How do we effectively control the sale of the horn? The sale of ivory proved catastrophic when the ban was lifted.
Well, then we must say you're either for trade or you're against trade. So if you're against trade, you're for illegal trade. It's easy, because we're not going to stop the illegal trade, and we're not going to fetch the same money from as the people in the black market. If I sell a diamond through the right channels, I will get X%. If I sell it in the black market, I will get more. And that's the way the world is working. But we haven't tested a system to say, we've only criticized the will to trade. And that's exactly my point. Why aren't we brave enough to say, let's agree on a way to do it? If it doesn't work in 3 years, we need another plan. But we can't sit back and argue while the animals in your background is being shot day by day. And we're not in a legal system in a continent where we can expect from any government to stop that. It's unfair from us, and it's not going to happen because it's not a priority. And the numbers showing us the number of the level 3, 4, and 5 people that is in trouble that shows us. So I'm sorry, I will differ with that opinion, but I mean we don't have to agree on everything.
Do you have any advice on the mechanisms we can develop to for the sale of the horns to regulate it better?
Oh, if we haven't tried something, we're not going to know if it works. I think we have, like if we look at the diamond trade, how the Beers controlled it. I think there is a platform that if you've got one platform from where it must be done, and it must be, the way we do with Rhodes. And unfortunately, that is also just the admin at this moment, because I don't think we have the DNA for all the rhino we do. But if we use that system and it's traceable and everything, then we have a traceable system. It must just be traceable, and then it's up to everyone if he wants to participate or not.
I think what I'm also gathering is that where you're stuck in a situation where you're between a rock and a hard place. Neither option is necessarily perfect in every way, and it's good to have a debate to weigh up both sides. But I think what you're also trying to say at the moment is that it's the situation we're in currently with the poaching. It's very difficult to protect against poaching, and it's only getting harder. As the value of the rhinos are decreasing and the poaching pressure increases, you need sort of an intervention to inject more money and provide better protection against poaching. And this could be maybe an opportunity to do that.
I agree with you. I think there's and as I've said, there's many ways to generate money out of your herd of rhinos. And it all depends. Some people have 4, 2, some have hundreds. If you work on a quota system, you can make sure that the herd can't be. And some people that's pro-trade, and the private guys will maybe disagree with me to say, but why do you want to control it with a quota system? But I think if we're serious about our rhinos and make sure that they increase, there must be motivations why you want to have certain actions. And if you've done that, it mustn't stop you to do that. And I mean, yes, and the most sensitive one and controversial one is on the hunting side, where there is a way to get rid of your excess bulls, is to hunt them for a very high value and to use that money, because in the past, we've used that money to either increase your land or to, you know, to make sure your whole operation is making money. Now, every cent is going back into your anti-poaching, and I think that is silly. And then the second one is to sell your rhinos alive, but there's no buyers. There's no buyers. The other thing is we can do what the people have done a couple of years ago and give 100 rhinos to Chiefs Island in Botswana. And I'm not going to name the people that was pro it and all over the papers and making movies about it. And there's not one rhino left. We can give rhinos away for free as well and feel good about it. Or we must say, I want to keep all my rhino, but I will utilize the one if I have the opportunity, if it's in a legal way, and sell it. And I think that's part of the options. And the other income generator is donations. But if I can tell you now, you look differently after an animal or anything if it's yours. So we must address the needs of the private owner in a way within this whole picture. And if we don't do that, we're going to devalue the rhino more and more people will sell their rhinos or just give them away where they get shot and it's not their responsibility anymore. And I think that is sad that this is busy happening.
And I agree. I think it's...
Sorry, Andrew, I just see there's a lot of questions coming up, but you can first say your part.
No, I was just saying, I was agreeing that it is a sad situation, and I was just going to read out an anonymous question from an anonymous attendee. And they say, thank you, Vian. I agree that we must stop polarizing the arguments. However, the numbers don't weigh up. Supply can never meet the demand, with horn regrowth at approximately 10 centimeters per year, even with the sale of stockpiles. This is a once-off sale and will never satiate the demand. We should learn from the elephants and ivory. The mixed messages of ivory sales did not save elephants. We are losing almost 50,000 elephants per year to poaching. I don't know if you have any comments to reply to anonymous attendee.
Yeah, anytime. I mean, I spent quite a bit of time in a lot of countries up in Africa. And to be very blunt now, I don't see elephants as endangered at all. I think there's huge numbers. I think because of elephant, there's a lot of other species that's busy to be under huge pressure. And you can't compare the numbers of elephant and rhinos. Let's say we have 20,000 rhinos and we have 600,000 elephants. Man, why we mention this in the same discussion? I mean, what I'm doing, I'm working with animals every day. So I think I love animals more than most people that say they do. That's my living. That's making me smile. That's getting me up in the mornings. But if we look at the numbers of rhino that is left, I don't even think that providing for the demand must be an issue, because we know it's impossible. But we're going to do it legally, get an income for the people that's putting the time in to try to save it. Or must I rather support the landlord wherever in what Asian country that is the kingpin in making the money? Because he thinks he can supply the demand. I'm sitting with the product and the animal, but I must listen to a comment that it's all about demand and we can't supply the demand. I mean, we're doing nothing about the demand, actually.
And I don't know if this is an unpopular statement, but I do remember attending a talk a couple of years ago, and I won't mention any names, but I think it was by a rhino farmer, and they were saying that, you know, the amount of money and the amount of land and their time that they're putting into this, that they only had a limited amount of time left. You know, they can't keep, you know, plowing hundreds of thousands, you know, in per year and getting nothing out. You know, there's only, you know, there's only so much more, that only so many more months or years they can take, you know, before they just have to pack up and give up on that venture. So I think that for some people it's a donation, or you need to provide money in that way. But I think we should also move on to the next questions.
Yes, I see Birgit Eggers says providing communities with rhino, which they need to take care of and reap the financial benefits of the harvesting and sale of the horn, should be a serious consideration. Oh, wait. the safety of those rhinos would then be paramount to those communities. I don't know if you have any feedback on that.
I think that was very relative 10 years ago. But the cost of looking after a rhino, I don't think communities can at this moment, I don't know how they're going to manage with that huge cost. I would rather say that communities must benefit out of rhino sales from Kruger. Kruger's got a huge stockpile. So if the communities around Kruger can benefit and not benefit from the kickbacks they're getting from the poaching syndicates, that can maybe start to make the rhinos within Kruger more safe. And so is the communities around Pilanesberg or whatever. If us and our government and everyone involved decide that Pilanesberg, for instance, can sell 20% of their rhinos horns every year, the communities can benefit from that and be part of the protection plan. But I won't move rhino now to communities because I think it will be unfair, because then we must also give them the money to look after that. And now we put them in that red zone where it's unsafe. People come in, and it's criminals coming in. It's not nice people. So I don't think we must expose communities to that, but we can make another plan to make sure they benefit out of this idea. And as I said, we've never had a meeting or a conference where we really sat down, everyone from left and right, to say, listen, let's see what we can do to make it better. We keep on criticizing and personal opinions and whatever, and I think that is absolutely a waste of time.
I see, yeah. And then Angela Bruns also says, hi, looking at the current permitting and regulating system, do you think it is realistic that the trade can be sufficiently and effectively regulated to prevent that poaching is not still the faster route of getting horns out of the country?
I think if the permit system is effective and managed properly, and if it's not taking a year to get a permit, then of course it will never supply 100% of the people that want it. But at least we can take a little market share, and us people caring about the rhino benefit from it. So I don't think we can say that it can replace that, but I do believe that if we do it in a central, let's say central bank way, like they do with the diamonds or whatever, and people come in and it's a tender process or whatever, once, 2, 3 times a year. I just want to say as well, I don't agree on a once-off sale. I think it must be, there must be more than that, whatever, but not a once-off sale is not the answer. We've seen it with the ivory, where you get the syndicates coming in and only one guy is buying, and then they share it between all of them. But I don't think it will be naive to say it will, the illegal trade will be there. I don't care about that. I care about what we can do. What can we do that make it better for us? If it make it less, then it's great stuff. But at this moment, we're running out of steam.
Sorry, Andrew.
The world is very complex, and I think that it's really hard to predict how the world and how people and demand, responds to, actions and supply. So I think there are pros and cons and concerns on both sides. So Angela asks a second question, a follow-up question. She says, what do you think about the risk of legalizing trade, possibly making it easier to move illegal horn? And I would like to also add, do you think that providing horn legally, would that increase the demand? Would it make more ornaments available or desirable?
I think that's a question that, none of us can answer, to say, if we start a legal trade, won't we make the demand bigger and bigger because it is available now? You must remember, we only have so much rhino. So are we going to burn it and let our people starve from hunger because we just don't want the guys that wants it to get hold of it? Are we going to say, listen, we're going to give a percentage of our stockpiles in a sustainable way every year on 4 auctions, 1 auction, whatever, how we do it, and say, listen, we're going to supply that demand. I think there's a lot of things in the world. There's a shortage of food in the world. Where we want to take this conversation to, the argument. So I'm sorry. For me, it's worrying about the people and what's going to happen outside what we have is, again, for me, taking the focus away of a solution that might work.
And I think I would like to maybe add one comment, and you can also comment again if I'm wrong here, but before Renata takes the last question, and my comment would be that in an ideal world, maybe the money generated from the sale of these horns can be put back into sort of protecting the rhinos that we're kind of failing to protect currently.
You must remember, and I mean, I don't know the numbers exactly, but there's a lot of revenue that will come to government if this happens. I mean, there's tax, there can be a commission, there's a lot of things where a lot of money can be generated that must go back to help our national parks to save those rhinos that I said we are all part of. We're all part owners of the rhinos that's owned by the state. And we can use that. And then the rest can be used by the private guy to take full responsibility for the safety and the numbers of his rhinos. So I agree with you. There's systems, and as I said, there's a lot of things being put on the table. And I think PROA, and there's a lot of guys that already sat down and had these plans. But because it's not legal and because there's no support for it, it never happened. But I believe we must give it a go and say, listen, let's put a period to this and say, if it doesn't work within this time frame, we must look at a different solution. Because what we're doing now, on both sides, it's not working. I'm sorry, it's not working. You know, and if you look at someone that, if he's gone, he's done more for rhinos than anyone in the world, but he must be the most unpopular guy in the world with rhinos, is Mr. John Hume. I'm feeling sad for him about that. Doesn't matter if you agree with him or like him or not. What he has done is amazing. Doesn't matter if we agree with it or not, but he created a herd of 2,000 rhino with his own money. And we must take our hats off and say, listen, well done. We salute you. Doesn't matter if he made you angry on his way or you don't like his personality or whatever. That's irrelevant here. And that's why I'm saying is, you know, it is sad that we don't use what we have to save the rhino. And as I've said, the rhino can save himself. We don't have to do it. He can save himself. We must just allow it and get the right channel to do it. That's all.
I see there's a few comments here. So one comment from James. No one has proposed an effective plan for the sale of horn. Those which have been suggested don't stand up to scrutiny based on fundamental economic principles. Currently, the only sales are to criminal gangs and the traditional market forces don't apply. There is no negotiation of price. It's take it or leave it.
I think we created that situation. And I mean, we've got a lot of clever people in this country. I'm sure it's going to be easy to get a platform that will be acceptable and can be tested. So if there's people that believe that the rhino owners themselves is not coming up with a plan that can be scrutinized, then please, if you love rhino, come with that plan, put it on the table. Let's take it. Let's do it. I mean, I'm way past the point that I think, you know, to be my radical opinion on this side is going to do lots for rhino and opposing the one on the other side. Let's just get a solution.
And then Angela Brun says, I agree, the ones of sale will not change anything. We would need to increase the value of the live animal, making regular harvesting the incentive to keep the population alive.
That is absolutely true. And I agree with that.
And I think I'd like to add quickly that, you know, I think this is a very heated topic and everyone gets emotional about it. But I think that's because, you know, I mean, not most South Africans not having owned the rhinos, maybe not feeling it, don't understand how it feels on a personal level to have owned rhinos. But, you know, it's a South African animal. And I think that people, you know, obviously that's why people are so fired up about this. And I would just like to read out one more comment from an anonymous attendee. And they say, Björn, you said it yourself, there is only so much horn. There will never be enough horn to meet the demand. It will never stop poaching, and in fact, may stimulate demand for wild versus farmed horn. So I think there are lots of comments on both sides, and it's a very heated topic.
Yeah, I've missed you now a little bit. There in the middle, I missed you.
All right, it was a comment from an anonymous attendee just talking about sort of emphasizing their point from the opposite argument, I guess. And they're saying that there will never be enough demand, never be enough horn to meet demand, and will only stimulate demand for wild versus farmed horn. And so I think there are polarism.
But you know what? It might be true, but it's not being tested.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is my point. It's not being tested. Are we going to wait until there's nothing because we are scared we're going to stimulate demand? Or are we at such a point with the numbers of rhinos that we say it's worth taking the risk to see if we're going to stimulate the demand? And yes, if we did stimulate the demand, then there's just so much rhino. But at least, and I'm talking about from a private owner's perspective, at least I can make sure that those syndicates is not going to poach my rhino because I can generate an income. And you know, it's not being tested. That's an argument that I've attended the CITES Congress, I think 8 years ago. And that was also the argument there. And it's something that no one can argue against because it's not being tested. You know, I can't say it's right or it's wrong. And so I think it's the people that use that as an argument as well can't say it's right and it's wrong. Because as soon as you play with stats, there's some species that this model had worked and some people that model failed. And that's what I say. If we are concerned about rhinos, and we must talk about rhinos if you look at the numbers, we can't say rhinos and this and this and this species. Then we must really come together and sit and say, what is the solution? The solution is, even if we say we prepare to sacrifice a percentage of our population to save the rest, if we believe then that we, that's what I'm saying, the people that feel like that, with all respect, let's say not one animal out of a national park or private park are allowed to be traded with. That population must be protected and saved by then the donors' money and whatever. But let's allow a certain percentage of a quota or whatever of the private owners over so many years, and we measure it and say, listen, yes, it worked or it didn't work. Then we can make an informed decision. But this is paper arguments because nothing's been proved, nothing's been tested.
Jan, isn't it true that if you sell the horn, you can protect more rhinos, and if you can protect more rhinos, you can have more rhinos. So the more rhinos you have, the more horn you can have. So isn't it like positive? Like if you sell, you can keep them safe. You can have more rhinos. You can breed more rhinos.
I do think over time, yeah. I think over time the numbers will. But you must remember, rhinos take long to multiply. But you need to start. We need to turn it around at one point. At this moment, we can't turn it around. So obviously, and I know, you know, if you talk about value on an animal, a lot of people, you know, they don't like it, and I do understand it to a certain point. But it's unfortunately that's the only way. That's the only way we're going to, and that's what I'm saying. Let's test it with a certain percentage of our population, but we need to create a revenue and a value in some or other way. Emotion is not going to do it. I'm sorry, and it, just remember, I'm also getting emotional about the rhino, but I can't be blind of what's going on, and that is, we can argue until tomorrow, and we're not going to save one rhino.
Okay, so Vian, we have a question, okay, and a statement and a question from James. Currently, people see the value of horn that is being sold illegally overseas. We have to look at what can be done in a legal manner. What is the value of legally sold horn? We also need to look at actually what the markets are. Okay, I will read the rest of the part after the question, like the question, the value of the legally horn. What's the value?
No, yeah. I think there's people that's done in the past couple of years a lot of research, you know, and that travel to the east and look where's the real markets, and is the value for a legal horn really the same, you know, than otherwise? Is it only a myth that black rhino horn is more value than a white rhino horn? You know, what pieces that people look at, But again, we can't do it because there's no permits to do it, so we can't get the right answer. There's all thumbs up what the value will be, and I think we will create that value over time. I don't think the initial start the value is going to be close to what we maybe anticipate it will be, but it's also just a guess. You know, it's the thing is it's nearly impossible, and but it is possible. I can wait for the sun to go down tonight, go to my neighbor, shoot his rhino, 8 hours later, happy days. So it's possible, but it's possible for the wrong people. And I don't know. I say we must try. We must agree on a system. How that's being decided as quickly as possible and test it, and be big enough at the end to say, listen, it worked. We're going to roll it out. Or no, it didn't work. We must look at another one. But we can't sit with no trade and think we're going to save rhino. That's not going to happen.
It's trial and error.
I think with anything, but I think this is not, I think it's a calculated risk. We won't sit with less income by doing it. We can't be worse off than we are at this moment.
So the rest of the part of the statement was we also need to look at actually what the markets are. One of the biggest consumers at the moment are those people who use the horn as a status symbol. This is highly capricious or fat market. It is not a stable market and not basis of a good business plan. The fundamental question is, how do you sell the horn? You have to change various national laws to allow this to happen.
Yeah, I think it is. It's again, is it proven? Is that we anticipate will happen? Leonie, I don't know. It's not something that I can answer because we haven't proven, we haven't tested it. So yes, we know it's surviving all over the world. So is Maserati, so is Rolls-Royce, and a lot of other things. That's not because you drive more comfortable. It's a status symbol. You buy it because you can afford it. So I don't know. All I'm saying is, let's test it. Let's test the system and be big enough at the end to say, listen, we've made a difference or we made a mistake and now we're going to make it right. And we can do it in a controlled system because we still have the numbers. But if those numbers is going under this critical point, we're going to sit with a red face. And I think there's a lot of our parks that's already, unfortunately, and it's not that they haven't done a lot. The circumstances doesn't allow them to be successful. It's impossible for the guys to protect the rhino with that amount of pressure in Kruger. I mean, you can't say they're not doing their work. Just go there and you see how many teams is every night risking their lives in the bush. The pressure is high on rhino horn, and we sit with stockpiles, lots of stockpiles.
And I just, maybe this is the way I'm sort of seeing it from this conversation. I think that the Maserati example is a good example. You know, if you suddenly made a lot more Maseratis available, maybe it would be feasible that more people would want to then own a Maserati, you know, if the Maseratis are, you know, the same price as a Polo. But at the same time, I think you have to look at the other side and realize that we're not talking about Maseratis, we're talking about rhinos. And, you know, if their population gets too small, they're reaching a critical point where you can't save them. You know, they're dying. And you talked also about the long intercalving period and reproductive potential. You know, it's a slow process, and when their numbers get low, it's extinction forever. So it is a difficult argument on both sides.
Yeah, you know, I think if you see how slowly rhinos reproducing, they will stay Maseratis for another 50 or 80 years. It's not going to happen. It's not a factory that you can press a button and you make more. It will take time, and we have a stockpile that we can slowly put into the market and control it and control it and control it. We don't have to sell everything. We've got the product in our hand. I think and unfortunately, we must look at this as on the one side as a financial decision and how we're going to do it and how other models in the world like gold or diamonds is doing it and doing it in the same way because we want to save the rhino. We don't have, this The end game is that we must make sure that the rhinos are surviving and that we make the numbers more. I don't mind if there's 100,000 again, that the value is a polo, not a Maserati anymore. But at this moment, we sit with something that is very rare and very special. And we're giving them away to the vultures, back to the soil without earning anything from it.
Okay, so James said currently it is illegal to sell rhino horn in both China, and Vietnam.
Yes, it is illegal because of the people that's against trade convince those governments in CITES to change their laws. But I'm sure if governments can have agreements within governments, they can, sorry about this noise, that just want to. Yeah, just like this. I think this is better. You know, I'm sure if governments get the support and not the pressure from the one side of the game, then maybe that decisions can be turned around like any other decision. So I don't know. It's still, is there willingness to save the rhino? Are we playing an emotional game until that's finished and then try the next one to create money and a revenue for ourselves? And I'm sorry, but that is unfortunately what's happening.
We have a last comment and question here before we have to conclude. So this is from an anonymous attendee. How do you think putting a value on rhinos and making it more attractive to breed them is going to affect the environment and all other species living in a habitat that are in food competition with the rhinos? Are we not going to create farms of animals that supply a non-essential product and take away potential land for reserves and for farming land? And what will happen to the rhino genetics? Are we not going to inbreed the breed for bigger horns and therefore not actually contribute to a valuable population that can support or supplement the wild population?
Yeah, that's a mouthful. I don't think, you know, breeding rhino is a long process. I don't think suddenly a lot of people will jump on the wagon. Of course, if it's a good money earner, people will look at it as an option or as an investment. I think what happened the past couple of years in the wildlife industry, we lost a lot of land that went back to domestic cattle and sheep farming because of the pressure on the prices. So I think that is something that will go up and down there only. With the inbreeding on rhino, I think if you've done your homework, you will know that the genetic diversity of your rhino population is actually very limited and very small. And that is a concern for everyone. So all the rhino in private industry is actually coming from our parks. So we're sitting with the same genetics. People like Tabatola has done a lot of effort to get rhinos with a little bit of different genetics in and to see how they can maybe build a genetic pool that's very healthy. But that's something that that's an issue that we will sit. Doesn't matter what we do, the genetic diversity within our rhino population is a concern. But it's, you know, the economics and the in the world, anything that goes down will go up again, and the other way as well. So I'm not concerned that we will take food that will have a bad influence on food security. I think sometimes there's not a big difference on giving someone a plate of food that's worth 50 Rand or just giving the 50 Rand. So, you know, it's we must be careful how we drive our own views on it. I think our talk today is about saving the rhino, and let's that be our focus. It doesn't matter if we are far left, far right. I think if we are really concerned, let's get together and get a solution, a model that we can test. But we can't go on the way we're going on. There's a lot of people that invested of their own money, millions and millions, that's going to make a business decision at the end of the day that will be sad and will embarrass us as South Africans or Africans because we failed the species and we failed ourselves.
Leon, we would like to thank you for being part of our webinar. We really did enjoy it. And I think we all learned something today, and we hope that we will find a solution in the future. Thank you to everybody who put on a question. I hope we did answer everyone's question, and thank you for that. We will, do you have anything to conclude, Vian? Or anything to say?
Yeah, but you know what? I really want to invite anyone either to come and visit us to see how we deal with our rhinos and to see what we're doing and just to feel what we're going through. You're more than welcome to, Leonie, you've got my details. If you can't get hold of me, send me a WhatsApp. And I think there's a lot of people that will appreciate if you just come and see and share and then give your opinion. But if you haven't seen it, you know, I don't want to say keep your opinion for yourself, but just be a little bit soft on the people that's putting their money where their mouth is.
Okay, so Vian is from Wintershoek. You can go and search it on Facebook or on the internet. They're also on Instagram, Wintershoek Wild. I think that's the one they can go to. There's a few of their accounts, but the main one is Wintershoek. So thank you very much. We will show you the video again that we played in the beginning, and we do encourage you to donate or buy some of our merchandise. We do appreciate every single donation that came in. It will make a difference to Wild House Rehab Center that Vian is also passionate about. And thank you. We will have Dr. Emma Rambert next with patent Eureka's in rhino calves.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending our last speaker today, which is Dr. Emma Rambert. As you can see, we do have the link on the screen for donations, also the QR code that you can use. So we have Dr. Emma Rambert. She is from London. She actually came here for a holiday, and she's still on holiday working in South Africa. She will be talking about patent Eureka's and rhino calves that she's been busy with for the past few years, 2 years that she's seen. And we look forward to hearing what she has to say. Thank you, Emma.
Thanks, Leonie. Can you see me?
I can see you.
Can you see my presentation?
Not yet.
Can you see it yet?
It seems that you haven't started sharing. Just go to share screen. Share screen on Zoom and then select your video.
Thanks, Madeline. This is...
Okay, now you have to go full screen. You are perfect. Emma, you can go.
Thanks, Madeleine. That's a very difficult talk to follow. I think Jan should have finished that because it's a hard-hitting debate that affects all of us involved with rhinos, and very serious, important issue. So I'm a little bit more upbeat with mine. But morning to everybody. Thank you, Leonie, for the invite. I'm going to discuss 2 cases of surgical correction of patent urachus in white rhino calves, which I saw, and it's definitely in a field situation. I'm speaking as a general practitioner in wildlife, not as an academic, so you'll have to forgive me. Just as a review for everybody, and also I had to start brushing up on my anatomy. The umbilicus is a remnant of the fetal maternal connection. It's composed of paired umbilical arteries and single umbilical vein and a urachus. Before birth, the vein transports oxygenated blood to the fetus via the liver and the ductus venous portal vein, and the arteries carry waste and unoxygenated blood to the placenta. The urachus is the connection from the fetal bladder to the allantoic sac. And during normal delivery, the smooth muscle around the umbilicus contracts in response to stretching during parturition, and the umbilical arteries and urachus retract into the abdomen where they close. The umbilical vein and the remnants of the amniotic membrane remain outside the body and eventually shrivel and fall off. And the umbilical vein fibrosis, and I did have to look up, I don't know this in my mind, I had to Google, round ligaments of the liver and suspended in the falciform ligament. Depending on what year you are studying in, if there's any vet students, this will be a lot more fresh than it was in my mind. And the umbilical arteries collapse and become lateral ligaments of the bladder. It's just a diagram just to show you what I just talked about, just in utero, the fetus, and the various structures there. Umbilical disorders. Sorry, I'm just not getting my note there. One of the most common is the patent persistent urachus. It's a relatively common problem seen in foals during the neonatal stage. It can be both congenital or acquired, and at parturition, as I mentioned, the functional closure occurs. Through the anatomical closure does not. And when the umbilicus ruptures, the urachus normally closes, and this process can fail, or the urachus can reopen several days after birth. And the patent urachus can also occur secondary to infection of the umbilicus. As a quick summary of the diagnosis, I mean, it's straightforward. The urine leaks from the umbilicus, and it can either be intermittent or continually during urination. And the navel might just be wet, and that's all you see. Obviously, that's a bit more difficult with rhino. You may not be so hands-on, so we tend to see them if they've been abandoned by their mum, or obviously with the last few years of lots of rhino orphans coming through the system, I think we'll see this more and more. Ultrasound is a good idea. You would see the dilatation of the structure continuous with the bladder. I didn't have an ultrasound at the time, and hopefully next time, if there is a next time, I'll do that. And it's most common in compromised foals, and obviously we're getting compromised rhino calves coming in, and they have a higher incidence of the patent urachus. Sorry, I'm going to go back there. And the mild complications are urine scalding around the navel, dermatitis, and local abscess formation. And the more serious complications are obviously this opening allows for bacterial infection to spread. And the worst scenario is joint infections, so septic arthritis and pneumonia. If it gets this far, I think the prognosis is very poor. Treatment generally preferred. We've obviously got and just sort of application of chemicals such as dilute iodine, silver nitrate. In some instances, I see formalin is used, and it's been advocated to close the mild forms of this issue. but it can also lead to irritation if it's overused, and that's also an issue with the rhino calves. The majority of rhino calves that I've seen, and I'm sure people with more experience than me involved in the rhino orphanages can see that this usually works with rhinos, and that would be my first choice. Obviously, surgery is not my ideal. And also antibiotic therapy to reduce the spread of potential infection. And then obviously surgical treatment, which is what I'm going to talk about, and that's surgical removal of the infected naval structures and the closure of the opening between the urachus and the bladder. Now the interesting bit, my first surgery was in Faf. Faf was born in November 2019. He was abandoned by his mum on day one. We received him in at Wild Hearts from the Rockwood Rhino Project. First signs were reported to me on that day, and Ensabet, who ran the orphanage, did what she does, and we attempted medical management first, but the issue deteriorated. But he was always bright, but the opening was large, and I'm going to give you a very nice video. I hope this does play. This was sent to me by Ensabet, and it really does show you. It's a beautiful video, I think. Let's hope it works. Obviously, you can see this is quite a serious leakage. Usually you only get a little drop or just wetness around the navel. Obviously, this was sort of on day 3, 4. But it was always bright. And we tried everything to close that. I think Michelle Otto gave me, from the John Hume Project, gave me some advice that they have actually injected iodine. That seems to have worked. I didn't use that. Okay, surgery. This is from Dr. Murray. This is how it should look if you're going to do surgery, or how we would like to see it in an ideal situation. And this was my situation. So we were on the garden operating, and there's Faf on the right helping me with the setup. Okay, the nitty-gritty on the anesthesia. I was going a little blind here. I'm only really used to a lot of immobilization in rhino. So I started off with a pre-med of 5 milligrams of butorphanol and 20 milligrams of azaparone, and what I call a dreg of atorphine, which when I draw up the M99 and push it right back in. And that's what I use very often on immobilization in small calves in the felt, but I decided I would try and get him down on that first. We set up IV fluids in the auricular vein for general fluids, and also to facilitate top-ups, as I didn't know what I was in for. Initially, lactated ringers was used, and then it was changed to 5% dextrose, because I figured maybe a little bit of energy on that little thing would be important for post-operative. Gave Rimadyl, sorry, not finished there. Gave Rimadyl at a dose given to me by Johan Murray of 1 milligram per kilogram, which can be repeated 48 hours later. And also penicillin was given, repeated 2 days later. Put him in dorsal recumbency. Ventral abdomen was routinely prepared for surgery as well as we can do. This is our preparation. In retrospect, surgery on the ground is not a great idea for people with bad knees, which I have. It took me quite a long time. It took me over 2 hours to do this, because I hadn't done it before, and I had difficulty getting up at the end. But all of us in wildlife, I think, have the same knee issues. Okay, surgery. I made an elliptical incision of about 10 centimeters around the umbilicus, and dissected down to the abdominal wall. I also put 20 mils of lignocaine into the surgical area and made traction onto the umbilicus, and elliptical incision made around this area and into the abdominal cavity. This is the first time I'd gone into the abdominal cavity of a rhino calf, so I wasn't too confident with this. The linear alba incision extended cranially and caudally. And here we have a photograph of the urachus. I identified the 2 umbilical arteries, the vessels there, and double ligated with 0 vicryl and transected. And then I applied tension onto that stump so I could get into the abdomen properly and get down to the bladder. And that's just another view of that. I put stay sutures on each side of the bladder apex to facilitate the manipulation of the bladder and to help with exteriorization of the bladder. As I said, I haven't done this surgery in a rhino before, so I was sort of working on instinct. And to also, the stay sutures help to prevent the urine leaking into the abdomen. Intestinal forceps I put just distally to the stay sutures. That wasn't working that well for me. I'd do things differently on the next one. The urachus and the structures were removed, and then I repaired the bladder with simple continuous 2-0 vicryl and another simple continuous, just to make sure. That was all pretty straightforward, and the linear alba was closed with 1 vicryl with an interrupted cruciate, and subcutaneous 0 vicryl in a simple continuous. The skin was 0 vicryl with an interrupted mattress. And just to make me feel better as well, I put her in an abdominal bandage. I was a bit worried about the weight, especially with such a heavy animal. He was about 74 kilos on that day. There was no signs of infection in the urachus. I didn't send swabs off. Obviously, that is the ideal. So that's me sewing up, and then that's the urachal remnant on the right. So maintenance, obviously that pre-med was not going to last because I took rather a long time. I gave boluses IV of medetomidine in the form of Domitor, 1 milligram per mil. And I used 0 to 2 mils, which is about 5 micrograms per kilogram when required. I used that twice during the procedure. And ketamine at about 0.3, which is the 100 milligram per mil solution. And that was also required twice during the procedure. With the lack of monitoring, it was basically, it was a feeling when I used the top up. So it was increased heart rate, increased respiration. Luckily, not too much movement, excessive movement, that we decided when to top up. I also gave diazepam once just to help the relaxation. And that was first when we started to top up. So when we finished that, it sounds like I did it quickly. It didn't. It took quite a long time. It took, I think, close on 2.5 hours. I reversed with 2 milligrams of atipamezole, the VTEC 50 milligram per mil solution as a slow IV. And then I used 2 mils of the 6.25 yohimbine, also slow IV. And I gave naltrexone, half a mil into the muscle. He actually woke up quite quickly. The recovery was uneventful. He got up, he was a little too active. There was slight dehiscence of the wound a few days later. When we resedated him and cleaned and resutured that wound there, we started Perbac, 25 milligrams per kilogram twice daily for 10 days. And a close monitoring of the urination. I didn't know what was going to happen. Obviously, that was quite a traumatic surgery, and we went into the bladder. Dysuria did occur about a week later, and we were concerned about blockage. We attempted a catheter as he was drinking. He was very good and allowed us to do that, but also massaging the penis. And that dislodged a mucoid plug, and that was it after that. There were no further issues to date. And he's passed the 1-year mark, which made me very happy, because there's quite a few post-operative complications that can happen. This was a video from day one.
Come now.
Is any chance to use a video of a baby rhino? So Beaufort said that Fafa's reached the 1-year mark, which is great. And this is just an extra. There's a case 2 now. interestingly enough, by the same mother of Faf. Whether that's coincidence or important, I don't know yet. There was a report from Rockwood Rhino of a small umbilical swelling in a newborn male calf again, of 74 kilos, that's Myoto. Also mild urination through the umbilicus. We started medical treatment immediately, and we started Perbac as before, plus daily application of a dilute iodine solution. The swelling increased, accompanied by pus, which made me panic slightly, so we elected for surgery because I was concerned that the infection was going to spread. So I used the same pre-med as for FAF, and we changed the anaesthetic protocol after a discussion, and we decided to go for a continuous rate infusion as advised. These are just, obviously there was a update, we had a table this time, and more relevant facilities, much better. Bonus also being a vet nurse involved as well, which helped me rather a lot. My only problem here, so we set up the CRT, we had 200 ml ringers with 150 ketamine with 0.3 domitor, and we attached a 60 drop per minute admin set, and it was 1 drop per second to effect. It was going well, 2 IV lines set up, 1 for maintenance fluid and 1 for the CRI. As you see, 12 minutes post-induction, he stopped breathing. That's my controlled panic. Obviously, in those situations, we don't have many people involved. And in retrospect, probably an overreaction with my reversals next, but luckily we could control him. As I said, Siska, who's running the facility at Rockford, has a history of vet nursing, which helped me out a lot. We reversed with atopamazole yohimbine mix, Vitex already made up mix, and naltrexone. I tried to reverse everything because I was worried. I explained that either we were going to continue with surgery or I was about to do a post-mortem. We started CPR, Siska continued with it for me, and we kept going. I just kept on doing surgery, or I said it was going to be a post-mortem. And after approximately 5 minutes, he started to breathe again. After my heart attack, everything calmed down. I topped up with ketamine and diazepam to effect, and my surgical skills were a lot quicker than with FAF. So we managed to finish off, and it was a lot quicker than my first attempt at the patent urachus surgery. Post-op, obviously, was going to be a lot longer than FAF due to these complications, but he was nursed overnight. There were signs of inflamed and infected urachus, so that was important to start the antibiotics immediately. There was no visual sign further up when I got to the bladder. The surgical procedure was exactly the same as for FAF, as I previously explained. And then the next day, to a relief, I thought we'd have a dead calf. We had, again, another excuse for a baby rhino. And he's also not looked back, but he's still early days. There are post-op complications that we can expect. We've done a urine analysis of that. Everything seems to be normal. He's drinking normally, and I get regular updates from him. But again, I would like to see him reach the year mark. Let me see. I'm just putting those quotes because obviously we in practice sometimes haven't got the facilities or the brains of the academics, but that's why we all work together for the Rhino. And I got a lot of advice from people, and Dr. Google a little bit as well. And obviously we must give everything a chance. And I think really over the last few years, because of the poaching epidemic, we see a lot more, and we're doing a lot more with Rhino. I think when I first started, we weren't really doing these surgeries. And obviously people like Doc Murray and all the other guys that are doing Rhino surgery out there, obviously with either worse facilities than mine or better facilities than mine, we won't stop, and we're learning a lot. We just have to be able to publish these case studies so we can all learn. I just want to thank Ensabet at Wild Hearts, and obviously this forum is hopefully going to get some donations for her and this setup. That's Ensabet and her 2 children, who always help me. That's Isabel and Harry. Also to Rockwood with Vickers and Siska. And an added one for my daughter Phoebe, who helped me with this presentation. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, Emma. You can stop sharing your screen.
I'll try to.
At the top, there's a red. Stop sharing.
Yes, gotcha.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rambert. I think I speak for everyone when I say it's really been an awesome presentation. We had us glued to the screens the whole time. I'm sure I speak for Leonie as well, and everyone in attendance. So, you know, just to end off, I think I have some personal curiosities, and I would like to lead with those questions. And my curiosity is, you know, would this be seen in a wildlife situation, and what would happen if this was just left unattended?
Yeah, that is a good question, because I think we're seeing a lot more incidences. We're looking for things in these situations. This is a semi-intensive situation, and excellent monitoring. They know the day that the animal is born. These 2 in question, as I said, I think it's relevant that the mum has abandoned both calves that she's had so far. Whether she does that on the next one, we'll find out. In the wild, I don't think we'd see these animals. I think we might be leading to a little bit of stress with these intensive situations as well. Maybe she just, because it can be congenital as well or acquired, but the fact we've had 2 calves from the same mum, it could be congenital. We do see that in the foals. I think in the wildlife situation, we're not going to see those calves. So I think we don't see them. We just think that maybe they don't have a calf, and then they do have a calf. I would love to see, I don't think there's any, I mean, obviously my colleagues can tell us better if they've managed to rescue calves and they've got this issue in the wild. This is obviously an intensive situation. So we're seeing them, and I think people like Michelle Otto at John Hume as well has a lot of input into something like this, and also my other colleagues involved with the orphanages. I think we see a lot more because we're seeing a lot more.
I believe so. I think I you know, it's obvious that the level of monitoring in a semi-intensive situation cannot compare to a wildlife situation. But just out of your personal experience, and maybe you don't want to comment, but would you say there is a difference between male and female predisposition to this, or would that not have an effect?
Yeah, it's both males. I mean, I've had 2, so that's my 100%, isn't it? So it's 100% male in my two cases. I think there'll be input. There is a case, and I'm sure people can look it up. There is a case in zoos as well, and again, it's an intensive situation, so it has been documented. I'd love to hear any other colleagues' experiences as well, because we are tending to see a lot more issues. We're seeing a lot more orphans coming in. So we're doing a lot more with them. There's bullet wounds, there's machete wounds. We're seeing a lot more. And there is the zoo situation. And I think controversially, I'm going to say this is a semi-zoo situation as well, because, I mean, they're still out in the veld, but the monitoring is high class. I mean, they're seeing them every day. So we do get to see these animals a lot quicker. I think the more we treat these animals, the more we're learning, and that's why it's important to have these forums as well, so we can share all our experiences, because we're leading a little bit blind a little bit as well. Obviously, a lot of my research was done on the horses, and also equine vets helping me out as well. So I mean, yeah, we all have to share our knowledge.
And it's just going to end from me, but I just like to say that there are messages in the chat that are saying thank you very much, and I'm sure we will all thank you, but just to let you know that there are messages addressed to the panelists that are saying thank you.
No, it's been a pleasure. Go, Lemony.
Okay, so a question that arises is, what antibiotics did you use?
Yeah, I tended to go for Perbac. So, and the horse dose, 20 milligrams per kilogram twice a day. They are great to feed rhino babies. If they stop suckling, you're in trouble because you can't treat them. Obviously, we used antacids as well. It's a routine drug protocol for all orphanages. We use omeprazole in the milk as well because they are prone to gastric ulcers. But I use Perbac and you can grind it up and put it in their milk. But luckily, in both these cases, they continue to drink, and that's our own real choice, because to inject a little baby like that, they get a little bit sore, and it's more stressful for them. But obviously, if you can put the treatment in the milk, so it's Perbac is my drug of choice for them. We have Exceed as well that can be used, but I like the Perbac mainly because of the bladder and abdominal and skin, and it's a good broad spectrum antibiotic. I did use penicillin just to start the operation, but when I started seeing the complications, and like with FAF with the blockage, and I was a bit worried about post-operative infection, because you see it's not an ideal sterile situation I was working in. We tried our best. So therefore I would routinely use antibiotics with them.
What post-operative complications were you talking about with the second calf?
Yeah, he showed signs because there was an umbilical abscess, and it advanced up the urachus. I mean, obviously, if I'd swabbed and we could have cultured a little bit further up, it didn't seem to reach the bladder. But this was all visual. This wasn't swabs. This wasn't a proper workup. So you're looking at abdominal infection, peritonitis, fibrous attachments, I would say. I'm sure the equine vets would be more up to this with the surgery, or Doc Murray, but I don't think he's around. I think also there was a study which I thought was quite interesting. I've done my little crib notes somewhere here. There was a study in the USA on foals, which after resection, there was 83 in the study and 72. It was a mixture of normal patent urachus with infection, and some had concurrent diseases like diarrhea, septic arthritis. 73 survived to discharge. So I'm already 100% on my 2 cases, but that's not quite 83. And 32 had post-op complications. I presume it's things like that. I mean, obviously, wound dehiscence, that seems to be quite common. I was lucky that didn't happen on the second one. And it was very mild on FAF. So 32 out of the 83 foals had complications, and GA time, so anesthesia time, seemed to be a significant factor. So obviously, I would have thought with FAF being the longer one, I would have had more problem. It's still early days on Moto as well, the second one. So I'm not going to celebrate. I celebrated with FAF, and he's doing very well at the orphanage. He had a little bit of giardia, interestingly, soon after, but that was treated as well with metronidazole. But yeah, I would say that the complications are typical surgical breakdowns of the wound, infection, abdominal peritonitis. If the infection had spread, then you would look for more of the septic arthritis. But I think that would have been euthanasia. I don't think I would have won with that one.
Okay, I think we did finish with the questions. Renata, do you have any?
I just was wondering, should something extreme happen, like how do you do CPR on calves like that?
I didn't want that question because it wasn't ideal. Do you know what I did? I did panic, hence that I panicked very coolly. I think what you have to do, oxygen, that was one of my big problems. I didn't have oxygen, and that's one thing you really should have. And I do have a canister, it wasn't with me. And we do nasal oxygen, which would have helped. I actually just went back to my physiology of carbon dioxide, hopefully triggering the respiration. We actually did chest pumps. I de-scrubbed immediately and started on that as well. So we did, the heart was always beating. that was important. So it was respiration. And I started blowing up the nose. I held the mouth and I blew up the nose, and we kept doing that. And then I figured I've got to carry on with the surgery, and Siska carried on with that. I did throw this as completely ridiculous, but I learned once that there's a acupuncture pressure point nasally that you can put a needle in and twist. And quite embarrassingly, I did that one as well, because you do everything in that situation to get it back. And that's why I panicked a little bit with the reversals. Luckily, it didn't backfire on me, but I just figured I had to reverse anything that was depressing the respiration. So I did fully reverse, but I could finish off that surgery with diazepam and ketamine, with the lignocaine. I didn't mention, I did put lignocaine in that one as well. And I think that's very important. And I sped up my surgical time drastically. I did it very quickly as possible. So yes, it was a good call. That's not ideal. I think in a better situation like at Honest Depot, we would tube them, intubate them, so we could control that anesthesia better. But again, this is field surgery, so I wasn't lucky enough to be able to be in that situation.
That's quite interesting. I just have a last question. I know you said you only had 2 coughs, but what is the frequency of this occurring? If you should, take in that which happened in the wild that we can't see or know of.
Yeah, I'm sure it occurs more frequently in the semi-intensive situations. I've only seen 2 that I had to resort to surgery, but I have seen, percentages. I've seen a few that were fine on medical treatment, and that's the majority that are like foals. You can just do, because the movement is away from, and I'll stand to be corrected from the equine vets, the move is away from using over stringent solutions on that, because it can make it worse. So it is very important. It's a dilute solution of iodine or chlorhexidine or whatever you're using. And I say, I would love to know actually the percentages with the other guys, and if we could get together on that, that would be very interesting. I might make a few phone calls. I'm not sure if Michelle's on today. I'll have to ask her, because she would see a lot more. I think they've got the numbers going in, and also Petronella Careful Wild, Karen Trendler as well, being the original. I think she would be able to add to that as well. I mean, she's probably done the most. So yes, from my experience, I don't see it regularly.
I think that's all the questions. I don't see anything in the chat box or,
Thank you so much, Emma. We really did enjoy this presentation of yours. Currently, the 4th years did do patent Eureka's in equine, so it was very helpful for us as well. So hopefully when we do get a question in the future, we can answer it.
Even if it's nobody corrected my anatomy.
Is there anything that you would like to say to conclude?
No, I mean, it just goes to show that we all must talk about a very special species. I mean, as I said, I think Vion should have ended with that one, because we're only here because of rhino, and all these new surgeries or not so commonly performed surgeries are because of the dilemma we're facing. And I think irrespective of our individual views, but I'm sure people could guess mine, is we've got a lot of talk going on and no action. And I think we must just try and test our action. We've got to give action a chance, because these are very special animals, and I'm not going anywhere until they go somewhere.
Thank you very much, Emma. We really do appreciate it. We have the contact details again, like the link and the QR code. If any of you would like to make a donation, all of the funds will go to Wild House Rehab Center. Emma's also very involved at the rehab, like Vian. We would like to thank each and everyone that joined, and thank you once again for all of your support. You can go check us on Facebook or Instagram. We have all of the information there. If you have any other questions, you can also ask us that, and then we can get back to you with the answers. Enjoy the video, and thank you once again. Hope you have a lovely weekend.
Please note that the CPD link is in the chat. If everybody can fill that in for the CPD, we will send replays to all